income, whether that's Social Security, SSDI, SSI, or VA benefits, then you know. You know just how quickly $2,000 can just evaporate, especially when inflation is running this hot. That's why the update we are diving into today is, well, it's absolutely critical. Right now, there is a specific proposal on the table from the president for a substantial $2,000 stimulus dividend.
And this proposal is pretty unique because it's not meant for everyone. We're talking about a payment that's designed very specifically to put money back into the hands of those who genuinely need it most. So it's targeting low-income and middle-income Americans, and it makes a real point of excluding high earners.
And this right here is the essential takeaway you need to understand right now. If your income comes strictly from fixed benefits, your eligibility for the full $2,000 payment is, well, it's virtually guaranteed. That's based on every historical income threshold we've ever seen used for this type of relief.
We've taken a stack of sources detailing this whole proposal, including the public announcement from back on November 10th. So we're going to unpack the political thinking behind using tariff revenue to fund this. We'll reveal exactly who qualifies based on the mechanics, like adjusted gross income. And most importantly, we will dissect those critical financial protections, the ones needed to ensure this money doesn't accidentally jeopardize your eligibility for other vital programs like Medicaid or SNAP.
Stick with us. It's time for the deep dive into the $2,000 dividend.
Okay, so let's start with a reality that, it really drives this whole conversation. Financial pressure. We know that for so many of our listeners who rely on those fixed incomes, whether it's retirement, disability, veterans benefits, every little unexpected expense, it hits hard. Every time the price of gas or groceries goes up, that constant, cost of living strain is precisely why we are focusing today on this pretty significant proposed financial update. A $2,000 figure that, if it passes, could provide some really crucial breathing room. That's the specific update we're dissecting. The proposal for a new $2,000 fourth stimulus check, or as the phrasing in the source material calls it, a dividend.
A dividend.
Yeah, and it's important to stress that distinction. This isn't just some vague idea. The proposal has a very clear, very explicit focus on a highly specific group of people.
And that focus, it comes directly from the source material context. There was a public posting made on November 10th. And that posting, it clearly states the intent here. This $2,000 payment is directed right towards low-income and middle-income Americans.
Right, and the emphasis of that announcement is what makes it so important for you, the listener. The originator of the proposal, he took great pains to make it, to paraphrase the source material, unambiguously clear that this payment is not for high-income individuals.
Right.
And that proactively addresses one of the biggest criticisms we saw with prior relief efforts.
Oh, absolutely. That they were too broad.
Exactly, that they sometimes benefited people who just weren't facing any real financial hardship. Here, the stated intent is the complete opposite. It's about prioritizing low and middle-income inclusion.
And that proactive exclusion of the high earners, it's so important both politically and financially. When you look back at the other stimulus efforts, that question of who gets cut off, it always generated this massive debate.
It did.
It really complicated the rollout of the payments. So by making the primary target so specific from the very beginning, the message is aimed directly at reassuring those low and middle income brackets that they are the priority.
Absolutely. And when we look at the context of the payment, the proposed funding source is where the political and economic intrigue really lies. The proposal details that the money is intended to come from specific tariff revenues.
Tariff revenues. Now that's fascinating.
Isn't it?
Because it completely reframes the money. It suggests the payment wouldn't be adding directly to the national debt, or at least not in the, the standard way through new borrowing. So can we unpack that, the implication of using tariffs here?
It's a critical political maneuver.
Yeah.
By sourcing the funds from tariffs, which are basically just taxes collected on imported goods, the administration is trying to neutralize those immediate arguments about fiscal responsibility.
The ones that always come up with stimulus programs.
Always. Critics of previous stimulus checks, they argue that they were inflationary because they were funded through debt. By using tariffs, the argument completely shifts. The new argument becomes, this is revenue that's already been collected, and it's simply being directed back to the citizens who need relief the most. It allows the whole measure to be framed as both immediate relief and fiscal prudence.
That really does make the proposal much more resilient against opposition, at least opposition that's focused only on deficit spending.
Precisely. And there's a secondary fiscal measure that's embedded right in that announcement, which ties directly back to that funding mechanism.
Okay.
The proposal states that any funds left over after these $2,000 payments are made
Yeah.
would be used to pay down the national debt.
So it's a two-part proposal, really. You've got the immediate targeted relief and then a kind of fiscal accountability measure for whatever's left. This helps define the scope. But let's clarify the exact nature of this money. Is this intended to be a one-time payment? Is it a recurring increase or just some kind of temporary emergency relief?
Based on the phrasing in the posting, specifically the word payments and the mention of money left over, it is very clearly structured as a one-time financial dividend.
Okay.
It mirrors the structure of the past stimulus checks we saw back in 2020 and 2021. So it's critical for listeners to understand this distinction. This is relief, it's provided once, and it's funded by a specific revenue stream.
And let's elaborate on why that distinction matters so much. A permanent structural change, like, a cost of living adjustment, a KHLA, that permanently changes the size of your monthly benefit check.
Right. Every month.
Every single month. This $2,000 dividend does not do that. It is a lump sum. It's designed for an immediate injection into your budget. It's a dividend, not an ongoing raise. So if this moves forward, this is a significant one-time lump sum you need to plan for, but it won't be reflected in your checks 6 months from now.
Okay, so understanding that this is a one-time dividend, it's funded by tariffs, and it's for low and middle-income Americans, we have to move to the most critical, practical question. Who qualifies? How does that low to middle income criteria translate into real eligibility for someone on Social Security or, say, SSDI?
Well, we have to reiterate the source material's core criteria. Low and middle income USA citizens. That's the foundation. Now, let's apply that criteria to the technical mechanics that actually determine eligibility, specifically the adjusted gross income or AGI litmus test.
Right. Let's get into the mechanics of fixed income inclusion, because this is where that idea of guaranteed inclusion for many fixed income recipients really lies.
Absolutely. The discussion surrounding this proposal, it explicitly addressed nearly all the major fixed income groups. So we're talking
Social Security retirees, SSDI beneficiaries, SSI recipients, survivors, spousal benefits, VA benefits, and even RRB Railroad Retirement Board benefits. For the vast majority of people receiving benefits from these programs, they fall squarely within that targeted income bracket.
Now, you mentioned AGI. For listeners who might be hearing that term for the first time or maybe just need a refresher on why the IRS uses it, let's explain it simply. What is adjusted gross income and why is it the key factor here?
So AGI is your gross income. That's all the money you earn in a year, but minus specific allowed adjustments or deductions, things like certain retirement contributions or educator expenses. The government uses AGI, not your total gross income, because it's meant to be the fairest gauge of your actual disposable income and your ability to pay.
Right.
And when it comes to stimulus checks, AGI is the mechanical line in the sand.
And the essential point for our audience is that for many fixed income recipients, their primary source of funds, Social Security, is often partially or even completely excluded from that AGI calculation. Or their total AGI is just very, very low to begin with.
Precisely. The litmus test that came up in the source material discussions, and it's a reliable reference point, was this. Is your AGI generally below $50,000 a year? Mm-hmm. If you are living strictly on fixed income benefits, the answer is overwhelmingly, unequivocally, yes.
That $50,000 benchmark, even though it's informal, it provides a really crucial reference point for that low and middle income definition. So if your annual income is below that figure, you are considered low or middle income in the context of previous relief measures. And that virtually guarantees you are within the sweet spot for this $2,000 payment.
Let's lock this down with some specific data points just to make it crystal clear. The average Social Security retirement benefit right now is a little over $2,000 a month.
Okay.
That totals around $24,000 a year.
$24,000 a year. I mean, compared to that $50,000 benchmark, that's less than half.
Right. That $24,000 a year average is, and this is a quote, well below any threshold that they're going to put in place. And that's based on the precedent we have from past relief. This huge buffer is the primary reason why fixed income recipients should feel highly confident about their eligibility for the full $2,000 payment.
But we should cover the complexity of the phase-out mechanism, especially for those folks who might have a little additional income, because this eligibility isn't based on an arbitrary feeling. It's based on historical income thresholds and phase-outs that were used during the three previous stimulus checks,
Hmm.
the $1,200, the $600, and the $1,400 payments. Can you detail how that phase-out structure worked?
Sure. The structure implemented an AGI threshold, so anyone under that primary threshold was eligible for the full payment. Simple. But anyone slightly above it faced a reduction, or a phase-out. This meant the payment decreased proportionally, usually was something like $5 for every $100 you earned over the threshold. And that continued until you hit a certain higher income level where the payment just disappeared entirely.
And what were those specific historical numbers for the AGI threshold? We can use these as a pretty powerful projection for this proposed $2,000 dividend.
Okay, so based on historical precedent from 2020 and 2021, the threshold for an individual to get the full payment was typically an AGI of $75,000 or less per year
75,000.
for an individual. And for a married couple filing jointly, that threshold was generally $150,000 or less per year.
75,000 for an individual, 150,000 for a married couple. When you compare those numbers to the $24,000 average Social Security benefit,
The buffer is massive.
it's huge. Over $50,000 of additional income before the phase out even begins to kick in.
And that buffer is a stronger guarantee than most people realize. The conclusion for you, the learner, is very clear. If you are listening and you're living strictly on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, your AGI is almost certainly well below the threshold for the full $2,000 payment.
But let's introduce a scenario where the phase out might matter, just for clarity. What if a retiree receives that average $24,000 in Social Security benefits, but they also have a small pension, or maybe they work part-time, and that brings their total AGI up to, let's say, $60,000?
That person would still be in excellent shape. I mean, $60,000 is still well below the historical $75,000 threshold for the full payment.
So they get the full $2,000.
They get the full $2,000. The phase-out only becomes relevant for individuals with AGIs that are getting close to that $75,000 mark. So if the phase-out starts at $75,000 and it ends at $80,000, then someone earning $77,500 would get about half the payment.
That deep dive into the historical numbers, it really does provide the necessary peace of mind. The intent of the proposal targets you, and the historical structure confirms that your in-kind level places you firmly in the eligible category for the full dividend.
And just for clarity, we should remember that small exception we noted. Those few thousand individuals who get the maximum Social Security benefit, which can push them over $60,000 a year.
Right.
Even that income is often below the phase-out initiation point. But it's just important to remember that this group represents the highest end of the fixed income spectrum. For the vast majority of recipients, especially those on SSI or the standard SSDI benefit, their AGI falls so far below the threshold that eligibility is just not a concern.
Okay. We know the intent, and we know the target audience is highly likely to qualify. Now we have to address the major source of skepticism. As we see constantly in the feedback, the sentiment is often, I'll believe it when I see it.
And that's understandable.
We have to acknowledge that while the proposal is clear, the concrete details of implementation are, well, they're still missing.
That skepticism is warranted by, the speed of legislative processes, but we can manage expectations by detailing what those missing steps are. We need clarity on two major missing details that will transform this from a proposal into an actual reality.
Okay, what specifically do we need clarity on?
First, the precise dollar amount for the income threshold. While we can reliably project it'll be around that $75,000 AGI mark for individuals, we need Congress or the relevant executive body to officially announce where they will draw that line in the sand for this specific dividend.
Right, the final number.
The final number. And second, we need the specific payment schedule, the official payment dates. And those dates are only determined after the mechanism is fully funded and signed into law.
So the moment those exact thresholds and dates are announced, that's the moment this moves from proposal to certainty. Until then, the legislative process has to play out. For the listener, what does that legislative process look like here? Is this an executive order, or does Congress need to pass a bill?
Given the nature of the funding drawing from tariff revenues and tying the remainder to debt reduction, this absolutely requires legislative action. It would need to be introduced as a bill. It would have to pass through both chambers of Congress and then be signed by the president.
So there are a few hurdles.
There are, and this is why the timeline is uncertain. We are tracking a proposal that needs to become law before implementation can begin. That's why we just can't give you hard dates today.
And since we can't give hard dates, let's look at past experiences referenced in the source to project how the delivery might happen when those details are finalized. How were the previous checks delivered, and how will this one likely follow suit for the fixed income audience?
Based on prior stimulus experiences, the delivery methods are highly predictable because they really just rely on existing government infrastructure. The primary and the fastest method will be direct deposit.
Okay.
For anyone who has their bank account information linked to the SSA, the VA, or the IRS.
And critically for our audience, the direct express cards. I mean, this is the primary way many SSI and low-income Social Security recipients get their monthly funds.
Exactly. The direct express cards are absolutely essential here. If the money is routed through the Social Security Administration or the Treasury, it would use the existing electronic payment rails, which means direct express card holders would receive the payment automatically onto their cards.
That's great news.
It is. This method proved extremely efficient during prior relief efforts, and it often led to the fastest dispersal of funds among the fixed income population.
That is a huge relief. Now let's talk application. If I'm on Social Security or VA disability, do I need to worry about filling out some new application form to get this $2,000?
Reassuringly, based on the previous structure of all three stimulus checks, no new application is needed for the vast majority of existing benefit recipients.
Okay.
Eligibility is determined automatically. It's done via existing SSA, VA, or IRS records. If you are already receiving a fixed benefit, SSDI, via disability, retirement, you are already in the system. The government has your payment method, it has your address. The system should be automatic for you.
Right. The only people who might have had to file a form in the past were those who had zero income and didn't usually file taxes. But for existing beneficiaries, it's largely automatic, which minimizes the administrative burden and really speeds up delivery once the legislation is passed.
And addressing that skepticism directly. We understand the frustration that comes with waiting for legislative details. We really do. However, maintaining a hopeful yet informed mindset means understanding the process and watching for the next key steps. That's the passage of the bill and the setting of the exact threshold and payment dates, rather than just dismissing the possibility outright. The intent behind this is strong, and the funding source is politically novel, which gives this proposal a unique momentum.
Let's add a layer of practical advice here regarding the timeline. Based on past rollouts, once a bill is signed, how quickly could those direct express and direct deposit payments typically begin to flow? Are we talking weeks or months?
Well, once the bill is signed and the Treasury Department is authorized, the electronic payments, so direct deposit and direct express, are usually the very first ways. We saw in previous efforts that the first wave of electronic payments started hitting accounts within about 10 to 14 days of the law being enacted.
That's pretty fast.
It is. Paper checks, on the other hand, unfortunately, take significantly longer, sometimes stretching into 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
So if you receive your benefits via paper check, that's a good reminder to consider switching to direct deposit through the My Social Security portal to ensure you get the quickest access to this $2,000 dividend should it pass.
Delivery speed is important, but for our low-income audience, safety is everything. Once that $2,000 dividend arrives, keeping it safe and making sure it doesn't harm eligibility for other vital, means-tested programs is absolutely paramount. We have to look at the tax and benefit impact based on the structure of previous federal relief.
This section is absolutely critical, especially for SSI recipients and anyone who's using SNAP, Medicaid, or housing assistance. We have to make sure this $2,000 benefit, which is designed to help, doesn't accidentally cause a disqualification for necessary long-term assistance.
Okay, let's start with flexibility. If I get $2,000, does that count as taxable income that I need to report next April?
Historically, federal stimulus checks have been classified as refundable tax credits, which legally makes them non-taxable income. So we must advise you to anticipate that this $2,000 dividend will follow that same precedent and be completely tax-free. I mean, given the nature of this payment as relief and its low-income target, classifying it as tax-free is just the standard federal procedure to maximize the benefit to you. We will, of course, confirm this detail when the final legislation is announced, but the expectation, based on all precedent, is that it will be tax-free.
Next, let's talk about benefit eligibility protection, and we need to dedicate some serious time to this. This is where SSI recipients especially need robust reassurance. If I get this $2,000 lump sum, will it count as income and jeopardize my status for Medicaid or SNAP?
This is the most complex and critical area. Typically, receiving a lump sum like this could have two negative effects for SSI recipients. First, it could count as income in the month it's received, which could potentially reduce their monthly SSI payment. Second, and this is the big one, if the money isn't spent immediately, it counts toward the resource limit.
And the resource limit for an individual on SSI is notoriously low. It's just $2,000. So receiving a $2,000 dividend instantly puts many recipients right at or even over that threshold.
That's the danger.
Uh,
Without special protections written into the law, receiving $2,000 would jeopardize their resource limit and their eligibility for SSI, which, in turn, usually guarantees their eligibility for Medicaid,
A domino effect.
a huge one. However, previous relief payments were structured specifically to prevent this. Congress implemented a measure that stipulated these funds did not count as income for means-tested programs like SNAP, Medicaid, or housing assistance.
But the resource limit is the trickiest part. How did they handle that?
They implemented what's often called an exclusion period. For previous stimulus checks, the funds were excluded from the SSI resource, count for a period of 12 months from the date of receipt,
12
a
months.
full year. And that provided a full year for the recipient to use the funds, pay off high-interest debt, fix a necessary appliance, catch up on rent without losing their SSI or Medicaid benefits.
So that legislative protection is absolutely vital. We need confirmation that this $2,000 dividend will receive similar, specific language guaranteeing at least a 12-month exclusion period from the SSI resource test.
Yes.
Without that detail, that $2,000 could instantly cost someone their monthly SSI payment and their critical health coverage.
Absolutely. We track these details very closely, and you should not assume that the protection is automatic. It has to be explicitly included in the finalized bill. And this protection is necessary not just for SSI, but also for programs like SNAP and federal housing assistance, just to make sure the $2,000 doesn't distort their means testing calculations.
What about working beneficiaries, like those on SSDI who are using work incentives? Will this dividend impact their substantial gainful activity or SGA limits?
The good news here is that SSDI and Social Security income limits, they're based on earned income, so money you get from working a job. Since the $2,000 dividend is not earned income, it's a payment from the government, it generally does not impact the SGA limits or any other work incentives for SSDI.
It's in a different category.
It falls outside the calculation used to determine whether a beneficiary is engaging in substantial work.
Finally, let's talk about debt collectors. What about garnishment protection? If someone has outstanding debt, can a creditor just immediately seize this money the moment it hits their bank account?
This is another area where explicit legislative protection is, well, it's non-negotiable. Previous relief funds, specifically under the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, they included special protections that shielded the funds from seizure by most commercial debt collectors and creditors. This was designed to ensure the money served its intended purpose relief, not automatic debt repayment.
So, if the new legislation does not include that specific, explicit garnishment protection, then someone with an outstanding judgment could see the funds seized once they land in the bank account.
Precisely. We have to watch for confirmation that the $2,000 dividend would receive similar protections, ensuring the money stays with you, the intended recipient. Without that specific federal shield, the funds could potentially be subject to certain forms of garnishment. Although I should add, federal debts like back taxes or child support often have different rules entirely. The key is explicit language in the new bill.
Okay, safety measures are non-negotiable, and that brings us to the mandatory critical scam warning. This audience, our audience, is so often targeted, and we have to hammer this point home.
This is an emphasized point you must internalize. The single absolute rule is that you must warn strongly against scams. No government agency, not the Social Security Administration, the SSA, not the IRS, not the VA will ever call, text, or email you asking for personal information. They will not ask for your Social Security number, your bank details, or, and this is the big one, money to process the $2,000 payment.
We hear heartbreaking stories every day about people who lose their limited savings because some scammer pressures them. If someone contacts you claiming you need to pay a fee, or buy a gift card, or provide your bank PIN to unlock the dividend, hang up immediately. It is a scam 100% of the time.
The actionable advice is simple. Trust only official letters delivered by mail or verified government websites that end in .gov. You get suspicious contact, a text message, an email with a link, do not click, do not reply, and report it immediately. Legitimate government updates can always be found on official portals, like the My Social Security portal, which allows you to manage your benefits and get verified updates securely. Do not allow scammers to take advantage of this proposed relief.
All right, this $2,000 proposal is significant short-term relief, but how does it fit into the bigger long-term picture of financial support for seniors and fixed-income Americans? Is this a one-off measure, or is it part of a larger ongoing strategy for financial stability?
Wait, it's vital to contextualize this proposal. As we clarified, this is a one-time dividend. It's explicitly tied to a temporary, non-traditional funding source, those tariff revenues, and it's structured to be distributed immediately, which makes it very distinct from any kind of permanent structural reforms.
So we need to clarify again that this $2,000 payment is separate from and does not replace the annual cost of living adjustment, or QLA.
Absolutely. KLA is statutory. It's an automatic annual adjustment based on inflation data, the CPIW, and it's designed to make sure benefits retain their purchasing power year after year. This dividend is a targeted fiscal injection. It's designed to provide temporary relief in addition to the annual CLAA. It is relief, not reform.
Let's return to the unique economic reasoning that was cited in the source material. Why target this group specifically, and why use tariff revenue? This is where the political framing really comes into play.
The economic rationale is extremely intentional. Targeting low and middle-income individuals is seen as the most effective and efficient way to boost the economy in the short term. These groups have the highest marginal propensity to consume, which is just a fancy way of saying they spend the money quickly on necessities.
Groceries, rent, utilities.
Exactly. And that velocity injects cash directly into local economies, creating immediate relief in economic activity, which is a key goal of any stimulus effort.
And the use of tariff revenue. That's what makes this proposal so distinct from the previous rounds of stimulus.
Yes. The use of non-debt-based funding tariffs in this case allows the proposal to be framed as fiscally responsible. It aims to avoid the criticism of adding to the national debt, and the inclusion of that clause about leftover funds being used to pay down the debt further reinforces this image of fiscal accountability. It's an attempt to satisfy two politically opposed groups, those demanding immediate relief and those demanding debt reduction.
That dual function relief and debt reduction is what makes this particular proposal so interesting politically. It tries to create a new blueprint for targeted relief efforts.
Yeah, it's the critical distinction. It frames the payment not just as social assistance, but as a calculated distribution of funds that have already been collected by the government, and with a mechanism for fiscal accountability built right in. It's a way to provide targeted relief without triggering those massive political debates about deficit spending that dominated the last few years.
The federal action drives the conversation, but if this federal proposal moves forward, will any states follow suit with supplementary payments? Is there any state-level action we should be watching for?
Historically, yes. When the federal government implements large-scale relief measures, states that have budget surpluses sometimes implement their own localized relief programs.
Things like tax rebates or state stimulus checks.
Exactly. Particularly targeting seniors or fixed-income residents. We saw this phenomenon happen after the last round of federal stimulus.
So how should a listener check if their state might be offering some kind of supplementary relief?
We advise checking your state revenue department websites or your state legislative websites. These state-level efforts are entirely dependent on local state budgets and political will, and they will have their own separate eligibility rules, which might be even lower than the federal AGI thresholds. But if you qualify for the federal 2000, you should certainly check your state's policy as well.
So stay vigilant on both the federal and state levels for potential relief. The proposal sets the national stage, but localized action may follow. This has been an intensive, critical deep dive into a very specific and impactful proposal. Let's quickly reinforce the core facts so you can move forward with confidence and clarity.
The core facts are clear. We are tracking a proposed $2,000 payment, a financial dividend explicitly focused on low and middle-income Americans. Based on historical data, specifically the average $24,000 annual Social Security benefit and that historical $75,000 AGI threshold, there is a very high likelihood of inclusion for nearly all Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA recipients for the full amount.
And while we still await the precise income threshold and payment date, which, require a signed law, We know that historically, eligibility is automatic for existing benefit recipients. Furthermore, these payments are expected to be structured as tax-free and, crucially, protected from impacting eligibility for vital means-tested programs like Medicaid and SNAP, provided that necessary resource exclusion language is included in the final bill.
And remember the absolute mandatory safety advice. Always be on guard against scams. Never, under any circumstance, provide personal or financial information over the phone, text, or email regarding this payment. You will not be asked to pay a fee to receive your $2,000 dividend.
Now, let's end with a final provocative thought for you to consider. It builds on the unique financial structure of this proposal, the part that uses tariff revenue and includes debt reduction.
Since the proposal specifically mentions funding the payments from tariff revenue and then using leftover funds to pay down the debt, it raises an important structural question. Is the primary goal of this package solely the immediate economic relief of low-income citizens? Or is the unique funding mechanism, which bypasses standard federal borrowing and that debt reduction clause, is that the more critical political feature, one designed to create a new, less controversial blueprint for all future targeted relief efforts?
It forces us to consider the political and economic calculus at play, doesn't it? Is this the blueprint for how all future short-term targeted financial relief will be packaged, funded outside of traditional borrowing and explicitly tied to fiscal responsibility? That is a compelling question to mull over as this proposal moves through the legislative process.
We strongly encourage you, the listener, to subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. We are tracking this proposal daily. The moment those missing details, the exact finalized income threshold and the concrete payment dates are announced, we will bring you an immediate, detailed update on how the money will arrive in your account.
Please share this deep dive with any friends or family who are also on fixed incomes. Knowledge about the high probability of eligibility for this $2,000 dividend, coupled with the critical safety and protection details, is knowledge that can empower their financial planning right now. Thank you for diving.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is not just another update.
No, not at all.
This is immediate, really crucial financial news that could potentially deliver a $2,000 payment directly to you.
That's right, a significant amount.
So if you're an older adult relying on Social Security, or maybe you're receiving a fixed income from SSDI, SSI, or VA benefits, if you are low or middle income, this proposed financial injection, it is specifically targeted at your household.
We're looking at a massive financial update, and it's all centered on this potential $2,000 dividend.
A dividend, right.
And the administration's made it clear this is aimed at offsetting the strain of, inflation for Americans living on fixed income.
Which is hitting everyone so hard right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to cut through all the speculation, zero in on the source material, presidential statements, and explain precisely why most fixed income recipients are included by default, what the money is, and what you need to do to secure it.
That's right. We're going to unpack the context, get really deep into the eligibility math, and maybe most importantly, we need to spend some serious time on the logistics.
Yes, the how and when.
The how and when, and the critical financial protections designed to keep this $2,000 safe and ensure it doesn't, jeopardize your existing benefits like Medicaid or SNAP.
This deep dive is really your definitive guide to moving this $2,000 possibility from just a rumor to, a reality in your bank account.
So don't miss this. This is critical information you need to stay well-informed and protected.
Let's get into it.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are starting this session with immediate financial news that, if it gets enacted, it presents a massive potential boost for millions of Americans.
It really does.
I mean, this is a financial boost that is laser-focused on older adults, on retirees, disabled Americans, and low-income citizens who rely, entirely on fixed benefits.
And the source material we've synthesized for this, it comes primarily from these recent presidential statements. They're talking about a new $2,000 financial injection.
Right.
Sometimes you'll see it labeled a stimulus check, but it's often referred to as a dividend.
Which is an interesting choice of words.
It is, and our task is to dissect that language, clarify the explicit focus on low and middle income, and really connect the dots for you if you rely on those fixed payments.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've all been through stimulus rounds before, right? But the framing around this potential payment feels distinct.
It is different.
It's being described as a dividend, and the proposed funding mechanism.
Right.
That seems to be the key difference. It would be paid from specific tariff revenues.
That's it. That's the part that changes the conversation. This moves it away from, the typical deficit spending we've seen before and ties it directly to specific trade income.
And that's the core of the political messaging, isn't it?
It's the absolute core. The initial statement has been, and I'm quoting very, very clear, that this $2,000 payment is focused only on low and middle income people.
So right from the start, they're drawing a line.
A very clear line. It explicitly excludes high-income earners from the outset. This isn't intended to be a broad economic stimulus for everybody. It is targeted relief,
No.
and it's derived from a specific kind of non-traditional source.
I think that clarity on targeting is so essential. I really do. Because whenever government funds are discussed, the first question from you, the listener, is always, am I rich enough to be excluded or poor enough to qualify?
It's the first thing everyone thinks.
Right. And when you live on a fixed budget, those lines are critically important.
Let's ground this in its origin, then. The source material, it points specifically to a post made by the president on November 10th.
Okay.
And this post indicated that these $2,000 payments would go to low and middle income U.S. citizens.
So, November 10th, that was a few weeks ago now.
It was. But while the date of the post is in the past, the conversation around the legislative mechanics and the eligibility is very much alive right now. It's ongoing.
So this is not a done deal.
Not a done deal at all, but it is a serious proposition that's being discussed.
Okay, so here's where we get into the economic and political complexity of it all, the mechanism and the funding source.
Right.
It's called a stimulus check or a dividend. But as you said, the source material specifies it is proposed to be paid from tariff revenues.
Yes.
Now, for listeners who might not be familiar, can you just quickly break down what tariffs are?
Sure. Simply put, tariffs are just taxes or duties that are placed on certain goods that are imported into the country.
Okay, so this means the money isn't coming from our income tax revenue or from, increased government borrowing.
Exactly. It's being generated from trade policy.
And that choice, using tariff revenue as a funding source, that feels like a very deliberate political choice.
Oh, it's fascinating and incredibly deliberate. Proponents will argue that since tariffs are paid at the border by the companies importing the goods, it's a revenue stream that can be directly routed back to consumers.
Kind of a clean way to provide relief, is that the idea?
That's the framing. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the administration is attempting a powerful balancing act.
Okay, but what's the counter-argument? I could just hear the immediate skepticism from our listeners.
And it's a valid skepticism.
If tariffs are taxes on imports, aren't those costs simply passed along to us, to the consumer, in the form of higher prices on things?
Yes.
I mean, doesn't that just negate the $2,000 relief check? Because we're already paying for it in higher grocery bills or appliance costs.
That is the fundamental economic argument, and it's one that has to be addressed. Economists are, frankly, divided on it.
I'm sure they are.
But that argument that the tariff costs are internalized by companies and then passed on is certainly a prevalent critique.
So what's the rationale from the administration side?
Well, the political rationale here is that by returning this specific revenue stream to the most vulnerable households, they are providing a direct, measurable cash infusion immediately.
So they're framing it as a redistribution of trade income.
That's the perfect way to put it, a direct redistribution.
And if we look at the broader economic goal that's being indicated, it's actually twofold, isn't it? And it speaks directly to that political framing.
It is.
First, providing this immediate direct relief we're talking about. And second, and this was crucially mentioned in the proposal, any money left over.
Right.
After making these $2,000 payments, it would be used to pay down the national debt.
And that second component is absolutely designed to appeal to fiscal conservatives.
It has to be.
It blends the immediate targeted relief for consumption with a long-term fiscal responsibility mechanism. It's an attempt to head off that typical criticism that direct payments always increase the national debt.
So the structure itself in the argument, they're saying, look, we're using a defined revenue source and we're committing any surplus to debt reduction.
That is the argument in a nutshell.
I want to go back and directly challenge that persistent misconception we touched on earlier. This idea that these payments are for rich people.
Right. It comes up every single time.
Every time a program like this is announced, that narrative appears. But the source material is, well, it's emphatic. It says, quote, stimulus checks are never for rich people. ever.
And that isn't just rhetoric. It's not just a talking point. It's baked into the very structure of these things.
Perhaps so.
It is entirely structural. These programs, by their very design, they use income phase-outs to exclude high earners. The intent of this proposal is to target communities that are struggling the most with economic pressures, with inflation.
So for you, our audience, this should be taken as a guarantee, really.
Yes, if you are low or middle income, you are the target. If you are high income, you are structurally automatically excluded.
So just to reiterate for the listener, this is not a permanent raise. This is not part of a to-go-lay calculation, a cost of living adjustment.
Not at all.
The intent is a focused, likely one-time payment or dividend. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a scalpel to the mountain of financial news to deliver clarity on one of the most hotly debated proposals coming out of the administration right now. Okay, so let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are cutting straight through all the noise.
A lot of noise.
So much noise around what might be one of the biggest financial updates we've seen in a while. We're talking about the very real possibility of thousands of dollars in direct payments.
Right.
Specifically, that number we keep hearing is $2,000, and it could be coming to you as emergency relief.
And that's the keyword, relief. And for those of you on a fixed income, and we know that so many of you listening, whether you're a retiree or you're receiving Social Security, SSDI, SSI, VA benefits, your biggest question is always, am I included?
Of course.
We're going to make it crystal clear today why this payment is, well, it's pretty much designed with you in mind.
Yeah, this money could provide that breathing room everyone needs for bills, for rising costs, and we're going to break down the timeline, who's eligible, and how to protect yourself right now.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's really set the stage. Our mission today is to focus on these really high-profile updates. They're coming directly from the administration. We're talking the president, the Treasury Secretary.
Yep.
And they're using this specific term, dividend payments.
Right. And we need to translate that immediately. When you hear dividend payment, just, think stimulus check.
Exactly. It's a direct payment.
It's a direct payment. And the number that keeps coming up over and over is $2,000. Or sometimes they'll phrase it as thousands of dollars.
And what feels different this time, and you've pointed this out, is the sheer political commitment. It's not just a vague idea anymore.
No, not at all. You have lawmakers, senators, the highest profile people in the administration giving, almost daily updates. It suggests this is highly, highly likely to happen.
So the goal here is to filter out that noise, like we said, and really speak to the concerns of everyone on a fixed income. Retirees, people on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, VA benefits. You need clarity.
You need to know if you qualify, and just as important, when that money might actually show up.
Absolutely. The political momentum is building, and it seems like they're really committing their reputation to this.
They really are. And that's important because when they commit this hard, politically, it becomes very, very difficult for them to back out. The public backlash would just be enormous.
Okay, so let's unpack maybe the most interesting and unique detail about this whole thing. Where is this $2,000 payment actually supposed to come from?
Yeah.
Because it's not like the last stimulus rounds.
No, not at all. This is not the same playbook. Those were funded through, massive borrowing, just straight up deficit spending.
Right, printing money, basically.
This is completely different, and that's why they're using that very specific word, dividend.
Okay, so what does that mean? A dividend from what?
The entire plan is to fund these payments using tariff revenue.
Tariff revenue. Okay, explain that.
So, money the government collects on imported goods. The plan is to peel off about $600 billion of that revenue money that's already in the government's accounts and then distribute it back out to the people.
$600 billion. That is not a small number.
That's a massive number.
Before we even get to how they'll send it out, what does taking $600 billion from tariffs do to the rest of the budget? That money usually goes somewhere, right?
That is the multi-hundred-billion-dollar question, isn't it? And yeah, it's a major political trade-off. That revenue normally just flows into the general fund.
So it helps pay for everything.
Pretty much. Government operations, infrastructure projects, maybe paying down a tiny piece of the deficit. So if you divert $600 billion, you're essentially choosing not to fund other things.
So it isn't really free money.
Oh, absolutely not. Nothing is. It's a redirection. They're taking money that could have, say, repaired highways or funded federal agencies, and they're putting it directly into your pocket.
And that must be facing some serious opposition.
It is. Of course it is. But this is where the political messaging comes in. By calling it a dividend or a rebate to the American consumer, they're framing it differently.
They're saying it's your money anyway.
Exactly. They're basically saying you paid for these tariffs through higher prices on goods, so we're just giving it back to you.
Yeah.
And politically, that's a much easier sell than we're going to borrow another $600 billion.
And that amount, the $600 billion, it's a huge number. How much tariff revenue is that really?
To put it in perspective, it's nearly 2 full years worth of tariff collections.
Wow.
So it's a gigantic bet. They are betting that the political win from sending you $2,000 is bigger than any political fight over the budget.
So how does that $600 billion figure connect back to the $2,000 checks for everybody?
It lines up almost perfectly. The math works out. I mean, we're talking about a huge logistical operation here.
Yeah, I'll bet.
The goal is to send $2,000 to about 85% of the population.
Yeah.
That comes out to roughly 284 million people. And if you do the math, $2,000 times that many people is about $568 billion.
So the $600 billion covers it with a little buffer.
Exactly. The funding pool is specifically designed to cover the full cost. It's not an accident.
All right. That makes the funding part much clearer. It's a redirection. Now, let's get to what is, I think, the most critical part for our audience. Eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
We have to address the confusion and, honestly, the anxiety that was caused when officials, including the Treasury Secretary, used the phrase working families.
That phrase, it caused immediate panic. We saw it in the comments, the emails. I'm on disability. I can't work. Does this mean I'm left out?
Right. I'm a retiree. I'm not a working family anymore.
And we need to just state this as clearly as possible.
So let's be definitive. Are people on fixed income, Social Security, SSI, SSDI, VA benefits excluded because of that phrase?
No, absolutely not. 100% no. That phrase, working families, is it's political jargon, it's shorthand, it's meant to sound inclusive and relatable to a broad audience.
So it doesn't literally mean you have to have a job.
It does not mean you must be currently employed. The administration knows, they know full well, that excluding seniors and people with disabilities from a major payment like this would be political suicide.
Okay, so if it's not about having a job, what is the actual rule? What's the real criteria they'll use?
Well, it's one thing, your income.
That's it.
That's it. Specifically, your adjusted gross income, or AGI. They are not checking your employment status. They don't care if you have a job. The only question they ask is your income below the cutoff?
And what do we expect that cutoff to be?
Well, nothing is final until a bill is passed, but if we look at the past 3 stimulus rounds and other proposals, all signs point to a threshold of around $75,000 for an individual.
And for a couple.
And $150,000 for a married couple who files their taxes together.
Okay, let's quickly define AGI, because a lot of our listeners might not file taxes, so that term might be new to them.
Right, good point. So adjusted gross income is basically your total gross income minus a few specific deductions. For most people on a fixed income, your AGI would be the taxable part of your Social Security benefits.
Not the whole amount.
No, just the taxable portion. Plus, any pension income, money you take out of a traditional 401k or IRA, things like that.
What about things that aren't taxed?
Critically, non-taxable income doesn't count. So certain VA benefits or the non-taxable part of your Social Security, that's excluded. And that's really helpful because it means your AGI is often much lower than your total cash in hand.
So it's very likely that most people on Social Security or disability will fall well below that $75,000 line.
The vast majority, yes. So if your AGI is below that line, you qualify, period. End of story. The phrase working families is noise. Your AGI is the signal.
And let's just hammer this home with the historical proof, because I think it's the most reassuring thing we can offer.
It really is. The evidence is concrete.
Why are we so confident?
Okay, first, just pure politics. Seniors and retirees are one of the largest, most reliable voting blocs in the country.
They show up to vote.
They absolutely show up, alienating that entire group by denying them a $2,000 check right before an election. It would be... Well, it would be politically ridiculous. It would backfire spectacularly.
So there's the political motivation, but there's also the plumbing, right? The system is already built to do
The
that.
plumbing is already there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Look at the last 3 stimulus checks, the $1,200, the $600, the $1,400 payments. In all 3 of those cases, The system was already set up to send money directly to Social Security retirees, to SSDI recipients, to people on SSI, to VA beneficiaries.
Right.
They didn't have to invent a new system. They just used the payment info they already had.
And you even brought up a really specific example from back in 2009.
Yes, this is a perfect historical precedent. Back in May of 2009, during that crisis, the government sent out a special $250 payment. And it went only to Social Security beneficiaries, railroad retirees, and veterans.
So they've specifically targeted this exact group before?
They have. It proves they have the ability and the willingness to do it. So when you hear working families, I want you to replace that little bit of anxiety with the confidence of history. The system is built for you.
It's incredibly clear. Let's talk a bit more about those income thresholds, the 75 and 150,000. What about people who are right on the edge? Say someone makes 76,000. Are they just out of luck?
That's a great question. And no, they're usually not just cut off completely. These kinds of payments almost always use what's called a phase out.
Phase out.
Yeah, so your benefit doesn't just drop from 2,000 to zero the second you make $1 over the limit.
Okay, so how does that work, typically?
Usually, the payment amount starts to decrease gradually over a certain income range. For example, they might reduce the payment by, say, $50 for every $1,000 you earn above that $75,000 threshold.
So someone making 80,000 wouldn't get the full 2,000, but they'd still get something.
Exactly. They might get, say, $1,750 instead. It protects people who are right on that borderline from losing the entire benefit just because they're a little bit over. We fully expect to see a similar phase-out rule for this payment.
That's really helpful. Okay, now let's move to the legal structure of the payment. This is a bit technical, but it's maybe the most important detail for anyone with low or zero taxable income. What is this payment legally?
This is the absolute key to the whole thing. Legally, these stimulus checks, these dividend payments, they are all structured as an advance of a refundable tax credit.
Okay, two big phrases there, advance and refundable tax credit. Let's break down refundable tax credit first.
Right. So think about it like this. A non-refundable tax credit can only lower the taxes you owe. If you owe $500 in taxes, a $2,000 non-refundable credit will wipe out that $500, and the other $1,500 just disappears.
You don't get it back.
You get nothing back. But because this payment is refundable,
It's different.
completely different. A refundable tax credit is treated like actual money you've paid to the government. Even if your income is so low that you owe zero in taxes,
You still get the money.
you still get the full $2,000. The government literally cuts you a check or makes a direct deposit for the full amount.
That is the guarantee. That's the mechanism that makes sure everyone on a fixed income, even with no taxable income, gets the money.
That's the whole ballgame. And the advance part just means they give you the money now based on your status instead of making you wait to claim it on a tax return next year.
Which brings up the next question. What about filing taxes? So many people on fixed incomes don't have to file. Will they need to file a tax return just to get this money?
It is highly, highly unlikely. Just like with the last stimulus rounds, the Treasury and the IRS will get the data they need directly from the Social Security Administration and the VA.
So if you're already getting a federal benefit,
They know who you are. They have your payment information, whether it's a bank account for direct deposit or a mailing address for a check or a direct express card. As long as your income is below the threshold, you should not need to do anything at all. No tax return required.
that is a huge relief to hear. Okay, so we've covered the money, we've covered who gets it. Now, the big question, when? When might this $2,000 actually arrive?
Right, the timing. So the official word coming from the president is that the money is, and this is the quote, likely coming sometime in the middle of next year, or possibly a little bit later than the middle of next year.
Okay, so let's translate middle of next year or a little bit later. What does that mean in terms of months?
We're looking at a window of, say, late summer to early fall of next year.
So not next week.
Definitely not next week. Everyone needs to manage their expectations. This is not immediate. There's a whole legislative process to get through first. This money is not scheduled to arrive in the next few weeks or even couple months.
But let's look at that timing. Late summer or early fall of next year. That's not an accident, is it?
Oh, not at all. You just have to look at the calendar. That timing is perfectly calibrated.
For the midterm elections.
Right before the midterm elections. It is a classic Textbook political strategy. You deliver a huge, tangible financial benefit to millions and millions of voters just a couple of months, maybe even a few weeks, before they go to the polls.
And make sure the payment is fresh in their minds.
Top of mind. It's
Yeah.
designed to have maximum political impact.
And we have to keep saying this is still a preliminary plan. It's not law yet. What has to happen for it to become real?
Well, it has to pass through Congress. It'll likely be part of a larger bill, maybe an appropriations bill, or it could be a standalone piece of legislation. That process takes time. Debates, votes. That's why the target is the middle of next year. The final date won't be set in stone until that bill is actually signed into law.
Okay, so that's the planned timeline. But you mentioned an accelerator. What could happen that would make this money show up much faster than the middle of next year?
One thing, really, a major economic
A
shock.
crash.
A crash, a severe recession, a major market downturn, that crash and burn scenario. If that were to happen in the near future, say in the next couple of months.
The political timeline goes out the window.
Completely. The need for emergency fiscal stimulus would override everything else. In that situation, the government's priority shifts from political timing to just getting cash out the door.
And they would move immediately.
Practically immediately. An economic crisis like that triggers an emergency response. You'd see massive money printing, what people call helicopter money, just to stabilize consumer spending and prevent a total collapse.
You've mentioned a number before in a scenario like that, a staggering number.
Yeah.
$15 trillion. Can you put that in context? That sounds astronomical.
It is. And to be clear, that $15 trillion isn't just for stimulus checks.
Okay.
That's an estimate of the total government and central bank intervention that would be needed to stabilize the entire financial system in a crisis on the scale of, say, 2008, but in today's much larger economy.
So that includes bailing out banks, liquidity for markets, everything.
Everything. It's the whole financial war chest. The stimulus checks would be one of the first and most important parts of that, but they'd be a piece of that much larger response. The point is, if the economy hits a wall, this payment becomes almost certain, and it becomes immediate.
Okay, that makes sense. We're talking about a potentially life-changing amount of money here, $2,000. So we have to spend some serious time on safety, security, and financial protections.
This is a top priority, paramount.
Let's start with garnishment. If you owe money to a credit card company or a debt collector, can they just take this money from your bank account?
Great question. Based on all the previous stimulus checks, the answer is almost certainly no. Those payments came with very strong protections against garnishment.
So most creditors couldn't touch it.
For the vast majority of people, yes. Now, there were a few rare exceptions.
What were they?
Things like federally owed back taxes or court-ordered back child support. In those specific cases, the money could sometimes be intercepted. But for your typical debts, credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, the money was protected. We fully anticipate this $2,000 payment will have those same protections built in.
What about other benefits? So many of our listeners rely on programs like SNAP food assistance, Medicaid, or housing assistance. Will getting this $2,000 suddenly make them ineligible for those things?
That's a vital concern, and the answer, again, should be no. Because the payment is legally a tax credit, a one-time thing, it's not treated as regular income for these programs.
So that doesn't count against you.
Right. In the past, the rule was that the stimulus money didn't count as income or as a resource for at least 12 months. The whole point is to help you, not to accidentally kick you off other essential benefits.
And for those on disability who work part-time, what about SGA, the substantial gainful activity limits?
It does not count towards your SGA limit, not at all. This is a federal benefit payment. It is not earned income from a job. Your eligibility for the $2,000 is based on your total AGI, not on how it interacts with SSA's work rules.
Perfect. Now, the big one, scams. The second there's a whisper of thousands of dollars, the scammers just come out of the woodwork. They target seniors. They target vulnerable people. We need to be loud and clear about this.
We have to be. So if you are listening, please commit this to memory.
Yeah.
The IRS, the Social Security Administration, the VA, they will never, ever call you, text you, or email you to ask for personal information or money to release your payment.
Never. What are the red flags to look for?
Any message that creates a sense of urgency or fear, your account is frozen, or you must act now to claim your money.
High pressure.
Exactly. Anyone asking you to pay a processing fee or an admin fee to get your benefit, that is always a scam.
What about gift cards?
If anyone, for any reason, tells you to go buy gift cards, Apple, Google Play, Target, whatever, and give them the numbers on the back to pay for something, hang up. It is 100% a scam every single time.
So where do people get real trusted information?
Only from official sources. That means a physical letter in the mail from the IRS or SSA, or a government website that ends in .gov. That's it.
So if you get a suspicious call,
You hang up. You don't argue. You don't engage. Just hang up. And if you can, report it. You can call the Social Security Office of the Inspector General hotline to report scams.
okay, let's say the payment is approved, the dates are announced next year, and for some reason, a listener's payment doesn't arrive, or it's the wrong amount. What should they do?
First thing is, don't panic. With millions of payments going out, there are always some delays, especially if you've recently moved or changed bank accounts.
Your banks is key.
It is. The best place to check for official updates if you're a Social Security recipient is your online My Social Security portal. That will have the most accurate, personalized information for you.
So wait for the official word before assuming it's lost.
Exactly. The government will set up official channels to report missing payments, just like they did before. It'll probably be a tool on the IRS website. But wait for that to be announced. Don't call random numbers or click on suspicious links.
Okay, let's pull back for a moment. How does this $2,000 payment fit into the bigger economic picture? This is just a one-time political fix.
It's a signal. It signals a huge vulnerability in the economy, especially for people on fixed incomes. The fact that the government feels it needs to do a nearly $600 billion direct payment tells you that the normal systems, like the annual COA, aren't enough.
The cost of living adjustment isn't keeping up.
It's not with this kind of sustained inflation. It's a good mechanism, but it lags. This $2,000 payment is an admission that people have fallen behind and need a big, direct boost to catch up.
So if it goes out next year as planned, it's a targeted boost.
It's a targeted boost, but as we talked about, if it gets accelerated because of a crash, it signals something much more serious. It signals that the system itself is in crisis and needs an emergency cash infusion to stay afloat. The fact that they're preparing this tool shows they know that's a possibility.
Let's circle back to that political commitment one last time. They've gone all in on this, the funding source. They've committed so hard, as you said.
They really have. The political capital they've spent just talking about this is immense. They've built up a massive public expectation.
So what happens if they don't deliver?
I think the backlash would be absolutely massive. It would be seen as a colossal failure, a broken promise, especially by seniors and other fixed-income voters who've been told this is for them.
It would be a huge breach of trust.
A profound breach of trust right before an election. For that reason alone, the political pressure to make this happen is just enormous. It strongly suggests that, one way or another, this payment must happen.
That is the crucial context. Okay, let's bring it all together, a final summary of the most important facts.
Yes, let's lock in the key takeaways.
First, the amount. We're talking about a targeted one-time payment of $2,000.
Second, and this is the big one, who qualifies? Social Security retirees, SSDI, SSI, VA beneficiaries, you are included. Please ignore the political jargon like working families.
It's all about your income.
It is only about your adjusted gross income being below the threshold, which we expect to be around $75,000 for an individual and $150,000 for a couple.
Third, the timing. The plan right now is for the middle of next year, late summer, early fall.
But you have to watch the economy. A serious downturn could speed that up significantly, making it almost immediate.
Finally, the protection.
Remember, this is an advanced refundable tax credit. That's the legal structure that guarantees you get the money, even with zero taxable income. And it protects the funds from most creditors and from messing up your other benefits.
We completely understand how critical a payment like this is. It's about dignity. It's about paying the bills without having to choose. It's about providing that stability. We are going to keep tracking every single development.
Every press release, every legislative draft, we'll bring it to you the moment it happens. And that's why we have to encourage you, if this deep dive was helpful, please subscribe to the channel and make sure you turn on your notifications.
It's truly the only way to guarantee you won't miss a critical update on this $2,000 payment or anything else that affects your financial security.
And please, share this with friends, with family, anyone you know who needs this information. And leave your questions in the comments below. We read them all.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the headlines that matter. We have a major financial update to talk about today. It's coming directly from Discussions. right inside the Oval Office.
Well,
We're talking about a potential large-scale payment. Some are saying $2,000, others are just saying thousands of dollars.
yeah.
And this isn't just another rumor. The level of public commitment we're seeing from the president, from the Treasury Secretary, it's unusually high.
It really is. And for you, for everyone listening, especially if you're on a fixed income retirees, people receiving SSI, SSDI, the question really splits in two, doesn't it?
Okay.
First, is this money real? Is it concrete? And second, if it is it coming soon, or is it just, being dangled out there on a political calendar way off in the future?
Right. The immediate need versus the political game.
That tension is the single biggest thing we need to clear up today.
And we have to get this point across right from the very start. The conversations they're having explicitly cover a huge, huge percentage of the population. So if you get Social Security, if you get SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, and you've been hearing this confusing government speak about working families and getting worried.
Yes, a lot of people are.
Exactly. We're going to spend a good amount of time today taking those fears apart piece by piece with facts and history and just basic political logic. You are not being left out of this conversation.
And we're also going to dive deep into the mechanics of this thing. I mean, how they plan to pay for it. A $2,000 payment? That's nearly $600 billion.
So it's $100 billion.
The plan is to fund it all through tariff revenue, which, well, it creates a huge logistical puzzle. It's a massive reprioritization of how the government spends its money. And that's why the timeline is so uncertain, even though, as you said, the commitment from lawmakers feels overwhelming right now.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack these brand new statements. We'll clarify the sheer size of this plan, analyze the two very different timelines, the political one and the economic one, and most importantly, we're going to give you the straight facts you need about whether you're eligible for this money. So let's get into it.
Welcome.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are jumping right into the latest official statements on this proposed financial distribution. It's being called a few different things, right? A dividend payment, a rebate.
Right, but functionally, it's a stimulus check. The goal is to put cash directly into people's hands.
And our source material is as fresh as it gets. We're talking about statements made by the president just today, plus comments that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made over the weekend. So we're getting a really complete picture of where the administration stands right now.
And that combination is so important. You have the president's direct remarks, the big picture, and then the Treasury Secretary's perspective, which gives you the financial nuts and bolts. But what's really fascinating to me is the speed and the intensity of it all. It's not just one or two officials anymore. We're hearing from high-profile lawmakers. We're hearing from senators, the economic advisor, the Treasury Secretary himself. They're all giving updates almost every single day on this $2,000 idea.
It feels like they're all singing from the same song sheet, which is rare.
It is. And that intensity, it suggests that the political price for not doing it is already huge. After this much public talk, after all these promises, I mean, politically, logistically, it almost has to be a certain thing at this point. The train has left the station.
Okay, so let's unpack the heart of the plan. This potential $2,000 payment and, as you said, the surprisingly tricky way they plan to fund it.
Let's do it.
First, the benefit itself. A $2,000 lump sum payment for an individual. For families, we're talking thousands of dollars. For so many people right now, especially on fixed incomes, where the COLA increases just aren't keeping up with inflation, this isn't pocket change.
Not at all. It's breathing room. It's help with groceries that cost a fortune or prescription copays. It's real life-stabilizing relief.
And the administration is being very careful with their language, calling it a dividend or a rebate.
They are. The idea is to frame it as returning money to the public, not just printing it out of nowhere. But it's the sheer scale of it that makes the financing so difficult.
Yeah.
To really get why this has been such a challenge, you have to look at their funding source, tariff revenue. The plan is to take a huge chunk of that money, about $600 billion, and send it straight out as these payments.
That's a huge shift. So if they're only using tariffs, we need to understand what that $600 billion means compared to what they normally collect. What does that actually look like?
Well, this is what puts the whole challenge into perspective. Let's do the math from the sources. To send $2,000 checks to their target audience, which is about 85% of the population, or roughly 284 million people, they need something like $568 billion.
So they just rounded up to $600 billion.
Exactly. Now, compare that to normal operations. In a typical year, the U.S. brings in about $350 billion from all tariffs combined.
Hold on. If they need 600 billion, but they only collect 350 billion a year, that's almost 2 full years of tariff money.
That's it exactly. They would have to dedicate nearly 2 full years' worth
Breaking
of
news
income.
is unfolding right now that could affect millions of Americans' bank accounts. A significant development regarding direct payments has just emerged, and it's creating waves across Washington. But here's what's truly remarkable: there's another completely separate payment opportunity that could be heading your way, worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and it's happening now, not sometime in the distant future. What's most surprising is how little attention this is getting in mainstream media. Let me break down exactly what's happening. The president made a public statement today advocating for immediate direct cash assistance to American citizens. And before you assume this is just another standard stimulus package, let me clarify, this is something entirely different from the traditional relief payments we've seen before. This represents a fundamental shift in how federal funds are distributed, potentially bypassing traditional channels and going straight to the people who need it most. Today, I'll walk you through what was officially announced, what it means for your financial situation, and whether this represents a genuine opportunity or merely political posturing. Because let's be realistic, we've heard countless proposals this year alone about stimulus checks, rebates, dividends, and various payment programs. So let's separate fact from fiction and identify what you truly need to know right now. I've analyzed all the details so you don't have to waste time navigating the political jargon. Let's dive in. What was announced this morning represents a new approach to financial relief. The administration released an official statement this morning that I'm displaying on screen right now, proposing a significant reallocation of funds that traditionally go to large corporations and instead directing them to American households. To fully grasp the significance of this proposal, we need to look back at recent history. Remember the intense debates over healthcare funding? Those discussions centered around billions in subsidies that currently flow through complex systems before reaching citizens. What's being proposed is essentially a bypass of these intermediaries. The core idea is simple: instead of money being filtered through multiple layers of bureaucracy or corporate entities, it would go directly to the American people. This represents a philosophical shift in how government assistance is structured. Let me be absolutely clear about something important because there's considerable confusion about this. There are actually two distinct payment programs being discussed simultaneously. The first is a broad-based stimulus payment that would go to most Americans, similar to previous relief checks but potentially larger in scope. The second is a more targeted payment related to healthcare subsidies, which would affect a specific segment of the population. These are not mutually exclusive. If both proposals advance, eligible individuals could potentially receive both payments. The healthcare-related payment specifically targets those enrolled in ACA marketplace plans, which includes approximately 21 million Americans who use healthcare.gov or their state's ACA exchange. The exact amounts would vary based on individual circumstances like current premiums, family size, and income level, but we're talking about payments that could range from several hundred to potentially thousands of dollars. The fundamental question being raised is, if billions are already being allocated for these subsidies, why not deliver them more directly to the people they're intended to help? Now, let's take a realistic look at whether these proposals will actually materialize. The first major hurdle is, of course, Congress. And this isn't just a small obstacle, it's a significant challenge.
Okay,
Lawmakers
so
have been
let's
debating
unpack
these
this.
So are we
funding
getting another
mechanisms.
There's some
stimulus
major
check?
financial news hitting the wires. We've got discussions confirmed, like actually confirmed by the Treasury Secretary, about a potential $2,000 payment. Could be a dividend, could be a stimulus check. The terms are flying around.
That's right. And it's a significant amount of money we're talking about here, potentially heading out to millions of Americans. It's really caused a stir since the president first mentioned it, just a few days back?
Exactly. A total whirlwind of headlines. But now, crucially, we're getting some well, some concrete details filtering down.
Hmm.
Straight from the top of the administration, they're starting to define not just the amount, but also this really key income threshold.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we need to focus today. Our mission for you, the learner, is really critical. We need to cut through all that noise, the speculation in the headlines. We need to confirm the absolute core details. It's not just about throwing numbers out there. It's about getting the full picture, the context of what the government's actually thinking policy-wise right now. So, who exactly is being considered? What is this proposed income level they're talking about? Because that part, well, it's proving pretty controversial already. And maybe most importantly for people, when might this, substantial payment actually show up?
When does the money hit the bank account?
Precisely. This deep dive is all about getting you some actionable clarity. Because it's a fast-moving story, and honestly, it can be a pretty confusing financial picture.
And the confirmation piece here is just so crucial, isn't it? We're not relying on whispers or anonymous sources anymore. The initial idea, yeah, it came from the president, got amplified. But the real shift, the key update, was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stepping up. He confirmed this whole thing is under active discussion within the administration. That's a big signal.
Huge signal. It moves the whole conversation, doesn't it? From just a proposal, maybe wishful thinking, into, well, serious policy consideration, advanced stages. And it's backed by the Treasury Department's machinery now. That's significant.
So what's really fascinating then is the core question seems to be twofold. First, what exactly is this payment? Because like you said, the terms are all over the place, maybe deliberately confusing. And second, who precisely qualifies? And that second part, that's where the real tension seems to be.
Absolutely. Especially because the income levels they're floating right now, they seem quite a bit higher than what we saw in previous relief efforts, stimulus rounds.
Right.
And if that higher ceiling actually holds, I mean, that implies a much, much broader group of people getting this money, which, has seismic implications for the budget, for whether it can even get through Congress. Big stuff.
Okay, let's jump right into that confusing terminology then. Because you hear stimulus check, you hear dividend payment, sometimes even substantial tax refund.
Yeah.
Why is the language so muddy? What's going on there? And what does it actually mean for, the process of getting the money?
Well, the confusion is partly intentional, I'd say. But it also stems from the specific legal hoops the government has to jump through. To deliver large amounts of cash quickly, outside the normal budget process, they need a mechanism. The administration seems keen on dividend payment. Sounds nice, right? Like they're returning surplus money or profits.
Yeah, it sounds positive.
But really, regardless of the political label, stimulus, dividend, whatever the technical structure, is almost certainly an advance of a refundable tax credit.
Okay, advance of a refundable tax credit. Let's break that down. That sounds exactly like the kind of government jargon that just makes people's eyes glaze over. What does it actually mean for, the average person just trying to figure out if they're getting help with their bills?
It definitely sounds like jargon, but it's actually pretty important to grasp because it dictates how eligibility works and the timing.
Yeah.
So think about a tax credit generally. It just reduces the amount of tax you owe, right? But a refundable tax credit is special. It doesn't just zero out your tax bill. If the credit is worth more than the taxes you owe, the government actually sends you the difference as cash.
Oh,
It's basically designed using the tax code as a way to give direct cash assistance, even to people who maybe don't earn enough to pay income taxes at all.
So let's say the government decides you're eligible for the full $2,000, but maybe you only owed, say, $500 in taxes that year. You'd get that $500 covered, and then they'd send you a check or direct deposit for the remaining $1,500.
Exactly. That's how a traditional refundable credit works when you file your taxes. But now here's the key word, advance. By calling this payment an advance, what the administration is signaling is they intend to deliver that whole amount. The full $2,000 the source confirms is on the table up front, right now or as soon as possible.
So skipping the usual tax filing wait.
Totally skipping it. They're bypassing the standard yearly tax filing process, delivering the funds immediately, basically. Long before you normally file taxes for the year the credit technically applies to. The source we looked at explicitly called it delivering just a lot of cash, using a sort of fast-track method built into the tax code.
Okay, that makes sense. But this mechanism, structuring it through the tax system, immediately brings up a huge concern. We hear this all the time, especially from older folks, people on fixed incomes, maybe receiving disability, Social Security, SSI, VA benefits, people who aren't always required to file a tax return. If it's a tax credit, does that mean you absolutely have to file tax paperwork to get this $2,000?
This is so critical, and yeah, we have to tackle that misconception head on. It pops up every single time these payments are discussed.
Yeah.
The core fact, and this is confirmed by what Treasury Secretary Besson has said, and just the nature of it being an advance payment, is that filing a traditional tax return does not matter for your eligibility. Let me repeat that. Filing a tax return is not the requirement.
But how does the Treasury know who to send the money to then? If they're not looking at a recent 1040 form for everyone, that's the logistical gap people worry about. They think, they don't know I exist if I don't file.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it highlights how complex the logistics really are behind the scenes. The Treasury relies on existing, pretty comprehensive federal databases. So for people receiving Social Security, retirement, SSDI, SSI, or VA benefits, the Social Security Administration and the VA share that recipient data directly with the Treasury. They already have that info.
Okay, so those groups are largely covered automatically.
Largely, yes. For low-income folks who don't file and don't receive those specific federal benefits, it's a bit trickier. In past rounds, the Treasury set up special online portals, simple non-filer tools, to collect just the minimum info needed: name, address, bank details. The administration's goal this time, though, seems to be automating it as much as humanly possible, relying purely on income information they likely already have from federal records. Things like W-2s or 1099s submitted by employers or banks, even if you didn't have to file a return based on that income.
Gotcha.
So the bottom line is, just as the administration's discussion suggests, the focus is only on your income compared to whatever threshold they finally set, not on whether you physically mailed paperwork to the IRS.
Okay, let me just hammer this home for clarity, because it's so important for so many listeners. If you're retired, if you're on disability, if your income just falls below the level where you're required to file taxes, the Treasury Secretary's confirmation strongly suggests you should still be eligible for this cash payment, provided your income is below the line.
That's exactly right.
The tax credit advance thing is really just a technical label for how the government accounts for it and gets the money appropriated. It's not meant to be a barrier for you, the recipient.
Precisely. The system, based on past experience, is designed specifically to catch and include non-filers in these situations. And let's lock in that amount again. The president's initial announcement was quite specific: a dividend of at least $2,000 per person.
At least $2,000.
Right. So this isn't some small partial payment being discussed. It's a significant lump sum amount that's being actively shaped right now at the highest levels.
Okay, so we understand the mechanism. We understand the amount is substantial.
Mm-hmm.
The next huge question is, who actually gets it? Who qualifies? And this is where it gets really, really interesting, and where this proposal really starts to look different from what we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
The income threshold being floated is way higher than in previous rounds, which means potentially millions more people could be eligible for this $2,000.
Yes. This is, without a doubt, the biggest policy shift here. If you look back at the president's first statement, remember he said it would go to everyone, but then added the qualifier, not including high-income people.
Right, which left everyone asking, okay, what's high income? Very vague.
Exactly. Totally ambiguous, until Treasury Secretary Besson stepped in and provided that definitive clarification.
Okay, so what definition did Scott Besson give us? What's the magic number? Where does high income start, according to the Treasury right now?
The specific clarification from Secretary Besson indicates that high income begins at $100,000. So therefore, individuals with an adjusted gross income, or AGI, of $100,000 or less are being signaled as eligible for this payment.
Wow.
He explicitly laid out that $100,000 threshold, confirming the administration's current thinking on the scope.
$100,000 for an individual.
Yeah.
That feels like a really high ceiling compared to what we're used to, doesn't it?
It's enormous.
We should definitely put that in context, because previous stimulus checks, thinking back to 2020, 2021, during the pandemic, they generally used a threshold around $75,000 for individuals, right?
Yeah.
And then the payment would start phasing out pretty quickly above that.
That's exactly right. And that jump from $75,000 up to $100,000, I mean, that is the story here. It's a substantial, very deliberate increase in who qualifies. It immediately pulls in a pretty big chunk of the upper middle class, maybe higher earners, who were either excluded entirely or got much smaller payments in prior rounds.
Right.
This $100,000 mark, it feels like the administration is planting a flag, defining the boundary of the middle class for the purpose of this specific payment, at least.
So why the jump? I mean, what's the thinking behind picking $100,000? Why not stick with the $75,000 limit that Congress has, approved before? Seems like an easier path.
Well, the calculus is probably multi-layered. First, you've got the economic reality, right? An income of $75,000 today in late 2025, heading into 2026, it just doesn't feel like what it did back in 2020.
True. Inflation's hit hard.
Exactly. Cost of living is up significantly.
Yeah.
So a higher ceiling lets the administration argue they're truly helping the middle class, which, let's be honest, is always a pretty flexible political term. Second, there's the pure political reach. By pushing eligibility up to $100,000, they include this massive group of potential voters, people who might have felt kind of ignored by relief efforts that were more targeted towards lower incomes.
Makes sense.
It shifts the narrative, doesn't it? Away from just targeted poverty relief towards something closer to broad, almost universal economic support. Appeals to a much wider demographic.
It's like saying, look, we know maybe you're earning a decent salary, but costs are up for you too, so here's some help. It definitely broadens the tent politically.
Precisely. Changes the whole framing. But, okay, we have to look at the household picture. What about married couples? We know previous payments usually doubled the individual limit for joint filers. Does the source material, does Besson's commentary give us any direct confirmation on what the joint income limit might be this time?
The discussion from the administration hasn't explicitly nailed down the joint figure yet, no. But the analysis seems pretty strong on this point.
Yeah, the analysis strongly suggests, just based on historical patterns, how the IRS and Treasury usually structure these things, especially using adjusted gross income, that this $100,000 individual threshold would almost certainly be doubled for a married couple filing jointly.
So potentially up to $200,000 for a married couple.
That's the indication. A married couple could potentially have a combined income up to about $200,000 and still qualify for the $2,000 payment each.
So $4,000 total for that household.
Potentially, yes. Those are the general income parameters that Secretary Besson's comments are pointing towards right now. $100 K individual, $200 married.
That's a staggering potential reach. I mean, for a lot of households, the immediate thought is, wow, I might actually qualify this time when I didn't before.
Yeah.
Much wider net. But okay, let's pivot from the benefit side and dive into the expert analysis of this high threshold. Because there's always a trade-off, right? What's the immediate downside, and why does this generous ceiling create, potentially, a major political headache?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, that higher income threshold is directly inevitably linked to the overall price tag of the program. And that price tag, that's probably the single biggest factor determining if this thing ever actually gets passed by Congress.
It always comes down to cost.
Always. The financial math is brutally simple. The higher you set that income ceiling, the more households qualify. The more households qualify, the greater the total cost the government has to authorize and, crucially, fund the money for.
Okay, let's try to put some hard numbers on that increase. Because even with the lower thresholds last time around, that 75K individual, 150K or married mark, the estimated cost was already huge, wasn't it?
Astronomical. If we ballparked it back then, assuming maybe 85% of the population qualified, which is roughly 284 million people, you multiply that by $2,000, you are already looking at a cost of approximately $568 billion. And that figure alone caused a lot of debate and resistance last time.
$500 billion plus.
Yeah. So now you factor in the revised cost projection, the one driven by Secretary Besson's $100,000, $200,000 figures. With that new, much wider eligibility net, the total spending is projected to jump substantially, potentially reaching, maybe even exceeding, $600 billion.
$600 billion.
Yeah.
That is just an astronomical number. That's definitely going to make a lot of lawmakers sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
Especially anyone focused on fiscal discipline or the national debt.
Absolutely. It's the kind of number that stops conversations.
So this brings us right to the massive legislative hurdle. What does the analysis suggest is the likely fate of a $600 billion proposal like this, especially given how politically divided Congress often is?
Well, the analysis suggests this is where the proposal hits its biggest point of friction. It's Achilles' heel, maybe. Lawmakers, especially those already hesitant about big spending packages, and there are plenty of them, are very likely to see a $600 billion price tag as just too high, too much to approve quickly or easily.
So while $100,000 might be the line the administration wants to draw for their public message about helping the middle class,
Right.
it is absolutely not the line that defines political feasibility inside the Capitol building.
Exactly. You've nailed it. We're looking at a policy that's, financially very ambitious, maybe even generous, but that makes it legislatively very vulnerable.
Let's dig into that vulnerability a bit more. Which groups in Congress would likely push back hard against a bill this expensive?
Well, you'd probably see opposition from different parts of the spectrum, but for different reasons. On the fiscal conservative side, the argument is straightforward. Debt and deficit. They'll see a $600 billion relatively untargeted cash transfer as fiscally irresponsible, maybe even inflationary.
They'd argue it should be much more targeted.
Precisely. Money should only go to those in demonstrable dire economic need, not someone making $95,000 a year. Then, maybe counterintuitively, you might even get some pushback from the progressive side. While they generally support direct payments, some might argue that if you were going to spend $600 billion, maybe it should be invested in longer-term solutions. Things like permanent social program expansions, infrastructure, climate initiatives. Not just a one-time cash infusion that doesn't fix underlying problems.
So the sheer size makes it hard to build a coalition. Too expensive for some, maybe not the right kind of spending for others.
Exactly. It's just too large to make everyone happy. Which leads directly to the most crucial point about compromise. The administration wants this policy. Congress holds the purse strings. So what's the active discussion, the buzz around potentially lowering that threshold to make it more palatable?
Is that already happening? People anticipating the sticker shock.
Oh, absolutely. There's intense discussion, speculation at least, already bubbling up behind the scenes about needing to bring that income threshold down, maybe significantly. Why?
Yeah.
Purely to lower the total price tag and therefore increase the odds of it actually passing. We're hearing talk about maybe going back to the previous $75,000 level for individuals, or possibly even lower, down to maybe $60,000.
Okay, let's think about the impact of that. Dropping the limit from $100,000 all the way down to $60,000 for an individual. That's a huge cut in who qualifies.
Massive cut.
What does that do to the percentage of Americans eligible, and more importantly for the politics, the overall cost?
If that line drops to $60,000, I mean, you're instantly excluding millions of middle-income workers. Everyone making between, say, $60,001 and $100,000 is suddenly out. It dramatically shrinks the scope. Based on, rough census data and income distributions, moving from a $100 case ceiling down to a $60 case ceiling could easily reduce the eligible population by, say, 15% to 20%, maybe more. Which means that $600 billion price tag, it could drop much closer to maybe $480 billion, perhaps even a bit lower. Still huge, but maybe not as terrifying to budget hawks.
And for you, the learner, what's the fundamental why behind this potential political maneuver? Why would they deliberately walk back that generous $100,000 limit the president seemed to propose?
The why comes down to one thing: probability of success, getting the bill passed. Lowering the threshold makes it an easier sell to lawmakers, as the source put it, simply because the cost is less shocking, less politically risky.
A more palatable number.
Exactly. A lower cost is essential for trying to get any kind of bipartisan support or even just keeping your own party fully united. Plus, there's another angle. Lowering the threshold allows lawmakers to frame it differently. It concentrates the money more heavily on people who, from a purely economic standpoint, really, really, truly need this money.
So lower wage workers, retirees solely on Social Security, people closer to the poverty line.
Right. It lets legislators frame the bill as targeted emergency relief again, rather than a broad, near-universal stimulus. And targeted relief tends to be less controversial, easier to defend.
So we've got this real tension playing out. The administration signals $100,000. Maybe that's their opening bid, maximizing reach.
Mm-hmm.
But the legislative reality, the sticker shock, suggests that to actually get any money out the door to secure the votes needed in Congress, that number might have to drop substantially, maybe back towards $75K or even $60K.
That's the core dynamic. It's a high-stakes trade-off, isn't it, between maximizing the scope of the payment versus maximizing its actual feasibility.
Getting something done versus getting the ideal thing done.
Precisely. Secretary Besson's comments gave us the administration's ideal target, their starting point, perhaps. But the context, the cost analysis, reminds us that this figure is absolutely subject to negotiation, subject to potentially radical change as a bill gets drafted and debated.
So we all need to be prepared for that $100,000 ceiling to possibly shrink quite a bit in the coming weeks or months, depending on the mood in Congress.
Definitely. It's the number to watch.
Okay, let's assume, for the sake of argument, they do manage to find a compromise. They agree on a price tag, the legislation passes. Let's turn to the second most burning question for everyone listening: timing and logistics. People need to know, when might they actually see this money? What's the timeline look like?
Right, crucial question. The official indication we have comes straight from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He gave us a window. He indicated that U.S. citizens could potentially be seeing substantial tax refunds, his words, early next year.
Early next year. Okay.
Yeah.
Context is key here. The sources place this discussion in mid-November 2025. So early next year clearly means early 2026.
That's the time frame he signaled, early 2026.
Now, early 2026, while that might feel a long way off, especially if you're feeling financial pressure right now, we need to inject a dose of reality about how Congress works, or doesn't work sometimes.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier how slow the legislative process can be. Can you maybe use an analogy? Help illustrate just how difficult it is to pass a, let's say, $500 billion plus bill quickly.
Sure. Think about trying to launch a massive, incredibly complex new IT system across a giant global corporation. It involves tons of different departments, legal, finance, tech, operations. They all have their own priorities, their own concerns, and they all need to review it, tweak it, and sign off before it goes live.
It sounds like a nightmare.
It doesn't happen overnight, right? Same with Congress and a bill like this. Even if lawmakers came together today, mid-November, put everything else aside and started writing the legislation, the analysis estimates it would still take, realistically, about a month and a half minimum, just to get the bill written properly, debated in committees, argued on the floor, passed in both the House and the Senate.
Okay, so a month and a half, best case, from mid-November. That puts us right into early January 2026, assuming everything goes perfectly smoothly, zero interruptions.
Exactly, best case scenario. But now we have to factor in the political calendar, which always acts like a giant brake pedal on everything.
Ah, yes, the holidays.
You got it. We have to consider the upcoming political breaks. They slow the process down dramatically. Lawmakers are about to leave for their Thanksgiving recess. Then, inevitably, Congress adjourns for that long holiday vacation period, usually from mid-December through the new year. The source was pretty blunt, saying Congress is just very, very, very slow at processing huge, complicated financial bills like this. Bills that require intense, high-level negotiation.
Which means that timeline Secretary Besson gave, early 2026, it actually sounds pretty realistic, doesn't it? Maybe even a little optimistic considering all those hurdles.
It does seem realistic. You need time for drafting the bill, then the intense back-and-forth negotiation over things like that income threshold, then floor votes in both chambers, then potentially a conference committee to reconcile differences between the House and Senate versions.
And then it goes to the president for his signature.
Right. And even then, the work isn't done. That's when the Treasury Department's real heavy lifting begins.
Getting the money out the door.
Exactly. The money doesn't just magically appear the day the bill is signed. The Treasury needs time to actually organize the disbursement. That means updating their computer systems, cross-referencing all those eligibility databases we talked about, especially making sure they capture the non-filers correctly, and then initiating the actual payment process, whether that's sending instructions for millions of direct deposits or printing and mailing hundreds of millions of paper checks or loading funds onto direct express cards.
It's a massive logistical operation.
Huge. So that early 2026 timeline, it feels like a sober reflection of the combined time needed for legislation plus the time needed for logistical processing. So, key takeaway on timing. Probably don't expect this payment before January 2026 at the earliest.
Okay, that timing discussion brings us back nicely to eligibility, actually. Because the logistics, getting the money out efficiently, hinges completely on being able to identify who qualifies accurately. Let's use this moment to circle back and really hammer home the core foundation for who gets this money, especially since the Secretary used that phrase, substantial tax refunds, which could still confuse people.
Yes, absolutely. This point needs repeating because it is genuinely the most common misunderstanding we see. People get eligibility for the payment tangled up with eligibility for filing taxes. The source material is really adamant about this. What actually predicates eligibility? What makes you qualify for a stimulus or dividend check like this? Is it because you're retired? Is it because you receive Social Security or SSI or SSDI? No. The only factor that matters every single time, according to the analysis, is your income relative to whatever threshold Congress finally sets.
So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, your eligibility is based only on that income number compared to the proposed $100,000 ceiling or whatever it ends up being. The type of benefit you might receive, Social Security, retirement, disability, veterans benefits, or your employment status, working, not working, retired, all of that is secondary. It comes down to the income figure.
That is the absolute key detail recap. The government, when processing these advanced tax credits, is primarily focused on one thing, confirming that your income falls below the defined line, currently proposed at $100. As the source put it, they don't give a rip about all the other details like benefit type. Only the dollar figure of your total income matters for getting through that first eligibility gate.
Okay, let's delve just a little deeper into the structure, this advance of a refundable tax credit thing. Are there any, like, potential catches or reconciliation issues later on? Say you get the $2,000 early in 2026 based on your 2024 income, but then later in 2026, maybe you get a new job, your income suddenly jumps above the threshold. Do you end up having to pay the money back when you file your 2026 taxes?
That is an excellent, really practical question an informed listener should be asking. And based on how previous stimulus payments were structured, the answer is generally no. Typically, the Treasury includes what's called a hold harmless provision in the rules for these advance payments.
Hold harmless.
Yeah. It basically means the advance payment you receive is based on your income from the most recent tax data they have, which, if this passes in early 2026, would likely be your 2024 income data. If your income then increases later in 2026, the administration typically does not try to claw back that payment. They don't make you repay it.
Ah, okay. That's good to know.
It ensures stability for recipients. The idea is to provide help now when it's needed, not create some complicated repayment situation down the road that might discourage people from using the money.
That distinction is really crucial. It means people can hopefully use the money with some confidence, knowing a positive change later in the year, like finding a better job, won't suddenly result in a surprise bill from the IRS.
Precisely. And this mechanism, using prior year data, also helps address that logistical concern about non-filers again. The Treasury will be using the same basic systems and databases that process the previous relief payments, which means they have established ways to identify people receiving non-taxable benefits like Social Security, even if they didn't file, and issue payments based on that information from SSA or VA.
So the plumbing is already there, essentially.
The plumbing is largely there. The source was really emphatic on this point, stating directly, I would not worry about that at all. They don't care if you file a tax return. It has nothing to do with your tax return or not. It all comes back to that income threshold, not the act of filing.
Okay, so we've covered the likely timing, early 2026. We've covered the ambitious income threshold, $100K individual, $200 married, but likely subject to change. Let's circle back one more time to that political feasibility debate, because it really does feel like the central tension surrounding this whole proposal, doesn't it?
It really is.
The administration seems to be pushing for maximum eligibility, maximum reach, but Congress, or at least a significant portion of it, is going to be focused squarely on minimizing that financial impact, that $600 billion number.
Yeah, and this is where we need to look beyond just the immediate headlines and think about the longer-term political strategy involved. A $600 billion payment isn't just, a simple policy tweak. It's a massive economic intervention, a huge injection of cash into the economy. And the debate will absolutely revolve around whether an intervention of that scale is actually necessary right now, or if it risks negative consequences, like, say, overheating the economy again, fueling inflation, or adding too much to the national debt for future generations to deal with.
If Congress does push back, and they manage to negotiate that threshold down, let's pick a number, say, back towards the $75,000 mark for individuals, maybe $70,000 even. What percentage of the U.S. population are we talking about then? Would it still be a broad-based payment?
Oh, absolutely. Even a threshold around $70,000 or $75,000 for individuals, which is much closer to the actual median household income in the U.S., would still ensure that a huge majority of Americans qualify. You're likely still talking about somewhere in the range of 80% to 82% of the population being eligible.
So still most people.
Still most people, yes. It removes that higher-earning, upper-middle-class segment that the $100K, $200K proposal includes, but it definitely still constitutes a broad, very significant relief package. And politically, that's often the kind of compromise legislators lean towards, isn't it? It's still politically popular because it helps the vast majority of people, but it appears more fiscally responsible because it shaves off that most expensive top tier from the administration's initial pitch.
It becomes a political calculation then.
Right.
Is it better to shoot for the moon with $100,000 eligibility and risk the whole bill crashing and burning entirely?
Right.
Or do you compromise down to $70,000 or $75,000, guarantee a still massive, maybe $500 billion payment actually gets out the door early next year?
That is precisely the question being weighed behind closed doors right now in Washington. The source material confirms that the internal thinking among many legislators revolves around maximizing the likelihood of passage. If they can get that overall price tag down, closer to the $500 billion mark rather than $600 billion plus, the odds of the bill actually happening go up significantly.
Why? Just because the number looks less scary?
Partly, yes. It addresses that core concern about fiscal responsibility that resonates with a substantial number of lawmakers, maybe even some moderate Democrats, not just Republicans. The political environment just seems far more receptive to, say, $500 billion of what can be framed as targeted relief compared to over $600 billion of very broad relief.
Let's also think about the justification. When the government issued those big payments back in 2020 and 2021, it was clearly tied to an immediate visible crisis. The pandemic lockdowns, mass unemployment, was a stated reason, the justification being used for this potential dividend payment now, in late 2025, early 2026. The immediate crisis seems to have passed.
Yeah, the justification is framed a bit differently this time. It revolves more around the persistent high cost of living, the ongoing effects of inflation. The argument is basically that even though the economy might have stabilized in some ways, many middle and lower income households haven't really recovered the purchasing power they lost over the last few years.
So it's about catching up from inflation's bite.
Exactly. And that dividend terminology is quite strategic, isn't it? It tries to suggest this is maybe sharing the nation's economic output or perhaps addressing budget surpluses, even if those are debatable, rather than framing it solely as an emergency intervention needed because the sky is falling. It's an argument that the economic strain is still very real and ongoing for many families, even if the headline crisis has faded.
That framing dividend versus emergency stimulus, that's actually quite important for the political maneuvering, isn't it?
Absolutely. The administration seems to be positioning this more as a corrective measure, a way to help people deal with inflation's erosion of their budgets, not just another desperate injection of funds into a failing economy. It's perhaps a subtler framing, but politically, it might be a safer way to propose such a massive cash transfer in the current environment.
Okay, let's quickly recap the logistical steps the Treasury has to take if a bill is passed, beyond just hitting send on the payments. What else do they need to confirm about recipients?
Well, they need to confirm a couple of key things for each potential recipient. First, generally, residency status. These payments are typically restricted to U.S. citizens and certain categories of resident aliens. Second, and most importantly, that income level we keep coming back to. They have to verify, using the data they get from the IRS, SSA, VA, etc., that the individual's or couple's income falls beneath whatever final ceiling Congress legislates.
Right.
And since this is designed as an advance, the speed and accuracy of the whole operation depend heavily on how good, how current, and how accessible those government databases are.
Yeah. And what happens if, come January or February 2026, the systems aren't perfectly cinched up? Or there are glitches. We saw some delays last time. What are the processing times people should realistically brace for?
Yeah, based on past experience, delays are almost inevitable with something this huge. When a bill is signed, the Treasury typically needs at least 2 to 3 weeks just to get the first wave of payments flowing. That first wave is usually people for whom the Treasury already has direct deposit information on file from recent tax returns or federal benefits.
So direct deposit folks go first.
Almost always, yes. It's the fastest. Recipients who rely on paper checks mailed through the Postal Service or funds loaded onto Direct Express prepaid cards, they often experience longer processing times. It could potentially stretch into February, maybe even March 2026 for some people to see their money. Patience will definitely be required.
Good advice. And the key thing you can do now is make sure the government has your most current banking information, right? Through the IRS website or your My Social Security account.
Absolutely. If you have direct deposit set up, that is always the quickest way to receive these kinds of payments. Update it if it's changed.
Okay, one more critical area before we wrap up. Financial protections. This is huge for many recipients, especially those on fixed incomes or other benefits. If you get this $2,000, is it taxable income?
Good question. Historically, payments structured like this, as an advance of a refundable tax credit, are generally considered non-taxable income for you, the recipient.
Okay, that's big.
It's treated as a return of tax liability you might have had, or as structured government assistance, not as earned income, so no federal income tax on it, typically.
And what about other benefits? Does receiving this $2,000 payment affect your eligibility for crucial programs like SNAP assistance or Medicaid health coverage or maybe subsidized housing assistance? People worry about getting pushed over income limits.
Another critical point. And again, historically, Congress has been very careful here. These types of broad relief payments are typically excluded from being counted as income when determining your eligibility for most means-tested federal benefit programs.
So the $2,000 shouldn't mess up your SNAP or Medicaid.
Correct. The legislation usually includes specific language to ensure that this relief money doesn't accidentally cause someone to lose their core monthly support benefits. That's always been a fundamental protection built into these packages.
That provides immense reassurance, I'm sure, for many listeners. So the $2,000 is likely tax-free, and it likely won't count against you for your other essential assistance programs.
That's the standard practice and strong expectation, yes. And one more protection worth mentioning, garnishment.
Debt collectors.
Exactly. The legislation authorizing these payments usually needs to explicitly shield them from being seized by private debt collectors or subject to most garnishment orders. In past relief efforts, Congress specifically blocked banks and creditors from grabbing these funds out of people's accounts. Recognizing the money is meant for immediate needs, food, rent, utilities, not for paying off old debts, that protection is also crucial.
Okay, this has been incredibly detailed. Let's try to bring this deep dive to a close with a quick essential recap for the listener who just wants the absolute key nuggets to take away from all this confirmed financial update news.
Sounds good. Let's nail down the core points as they stand right now. First, the amount. The administration, via the President and Treasury Secretary, is actively discussing a payment, likely framed as a dividend, of $2,000 or more per person.
Second, the eligibility line. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has indicated the administration's current target defines high income as starting above $100,000 for an individual. This likely translates to about $200,000 for a married couple filing jointly. If your income is at or below that, you're in their target group.
Third, the big caveat. We absolutely must remember that this $100K, $200K line is highly contested because of the enormous, potentially $600 billion price tag. It could very well be lowered significantly by Congress during negotiations to make the bill politically feasible. That number is not set in stone.
Fourth, the timing. The official indication from the Treasury Secretary points to a potential arrival of these funds in early 2026. Not before then, it would likely be structured as a substantial advance on a tax refund.
And fifth, the mechanism. Crucially, filing a traditional tax return is not required to receive this payment. Eligibility hinges solely on your income level, which the government aims to verify using existing federal records, including data from SSA and VA for benefit recipients.
Okay, that provides tremendous clarity on a story that honestly just a few days ago felt like pure speculation and rumors. But this whole discussion, especially around the legislative hurdles and that massive cost, it raises a really important final question, doesn't it? The success of actually getting this $2,000 payment might hinge not just on, cold economic calculations or backroom political deals,
Right.
but maybe also on public sentiment, on the demonstrated perception of need out there.
That is such a powerful and I think provocative thought to leave with you, the listener. The analysis we've been discussing strongly suggests that legislative bodies, well, they rarely pass these massive, really expensive relief packages based only on abstract economic arguments or statistics. They need political cover. They need momentum. And the source material we reviewed explicitly mentioned this dynamic. It said that when the public shows excitement and demonstrates broad support on an idea, the likelihood of that thing actually happening becomes significantly greater.
So are you saying that how much people talk about this, how much noise the public makes about wanting or needing this payment could actually influence whether it passes and maybe even at what income level?
It suggests that, yes, the listener should really consider how public interest, public demand, can influence major financial legislation like this. We often think of policy as just happening between elected officials behind closed doors. But this analysis hints that public momentum might be a necessary ingredient, maybe even a crucial one, for a policy of this sheer scale and cost to overcome resistance.
Interesting. So if the public seems indifferent or maybe just focused on other things?
Then the opposition can focus purely on that $600 billion price tag, right? Frame it as wasteful spending.
But if lawmakers perceive, as the source put it, that the people are all jacked up, that they're excited, they're counting on this payment.
And maybe, just maybe, they feel more political pressure, more incentive to find a way to overcome that hurdle of the high cost, to deliver something.
So public silence could empower the fiscal hawks, while public enthusiasm could empower the proponents.
It's a crucial dynamic to consider. If the public appears indifferent or skeptical, the likelihood of legislative resistance winning out definitely increases. That could mean the eligibility pool shrinks dramatically, or the bill gets delayed indefinitely, or just dies. So your engagement, your interest, following this story, talking about it, it's not just passively watching the news. In a way, it potentially becomes a genuine factor in whether that $2,000 ever actually arrives in your bank account.
That is a fascinating insight into the real-world interplay between policy, the budget, Congress, and ultimately public will. This has been a really critical deep dive into this proposed $2,000 dividend payment. We've clarified the amount, the mechanism, the potential timing, and crucially, that contested $100,000 income threshold. We will absolutely keep tracking this story, watching closely to see if that ambitious $100,000 line holds, or if Congress, facing that huge price tag, forces it down closer to the more traditional $75,000 or maybe even $60,000 mark to make the bill happen.
Definitely stay tuned. We'll be monitoring every update coming out of the Treasury and Congress, especially as we head towards the end of the year and into early 2026. This is a story that will undoubtedly move fast once the lawmakers get back to Washington after the holidays and really...
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are cutting straight through all the noise.
A lot of noise.
So much noise around what might be one of the biggest financial updates we've seen in a while. We're talking about the very real possibility of thousands of dollars in direct payments.
Right.
Specifically, that number we keep hearing is $2,000, and it could be coming to you as emergency relief.
And that's the keyword, relief. And for those of you on a fixed income, and we know that so many of you listening, whether you're a retiree or you're receiving Social Security, SSDI, SSI, VA benefits, your biggest question is always, am I included?
Of course.
We're going to make it crystal clear today why this payment is, well, it's pretty much designed with you in mind.
Yeah, this money could provide that breathing room everyone needs for bills, for rising costs, and we're going to break down the timeline, who's eligible, and how to protect yourself right now.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's really set the stage. Our mission today is to focus on these really high-profile updates. They're coming directly from the administration. We're talking the president, the Treasury Secretary.
Yep.
And they're using this specific term, dividend payments.
Right. And we need to translate that immediately. When you hear dividend payment, just, think stimulus check.
Exactly. It's a direct payment.
It's a direct payment. And the number that keeps coming up over and over is $2,000. Or sometimes they'll phrase it as thousands of dollars.
And what feels different this time, and you've pointed this out, is the sheer political commitment. It's not just a vague idea anymore.
No, not at all. You have lawmakers, senators, the highest profile people in the administration giving, almost daily updates. It suggests this is highly, highly likely to happen.
So the goal here is to filter out that noise, like we said, and really speak to the concerns of everyone on a fixed income. Retirees, people on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, VA benefits. You need clarity.
You need to know if you qualify, and just as important, when that money might actually show up.
Absolutely. The political momentum is building, and it seems like they're really committing their reputation to this.
They really are. And that's important because when they commit this hard, politically, it becomes very, very difficult for them to back out. The public backlash would just be enormous.
Okay, so let's unpack maybe the most interesting and unique detail about this whole thing. Where is this $2,000 payment actually supposed to come from?
Yeah.
Because it's not like the last stimulus rounds.
No, not at all. This is not the same playbook. Those were funded through, massive borrowing, just straight up deficit spending.
Right, printing money, basically.
This is completely different, and that's why they're using that very specific word, dividend.
Okay, so what does that mean? A dividend from what?
The entire plan is to fund these payments using tariff revenue.
Tariff revenue. Okay, explain that.
So, money the government collects on imported goods. The plan is to peel off about $600 billion of that revenue money that's already in the government's accounts and then distribute it back out to the people.
$600 billion. That is not a small number.
That's a massive number.
Before we even get to how they'll send it out, what does taking $600 billion from tariffs do to the rest of the budget? That money usually goes somewhere, right?
That is the multi-$100 billion question, isn't it? And yeah, it's a major political trade-off. That revenue normally just flows into the general fund.
So it helps pay for everything.
Pretty much. Government operations, infrastructure projects, maybe paying down a tiny piece of the deficit. So if you divert $600 billion, you're essentially choosing not to fund other things.
So it isn't really free money.
Oh, absolutely not. Nothing is. It's a redirection. They're taking money that could have, say, repaired highways or funded federal agencies, and they're putting it directly into your pocket.
And that must be facing some serious opposition.
It is. Of course it is. But this is where the political messaging comes in. By calling it a dividend or a rebate to the American consumer, They're framing it differently.
They're saying it's your money anyway.
Exactly. They're basically saying you paid for these tariffs through higher prices on goods, so we're just giving it back to you.
Yeah.
And politically, that's a much easier sell than we're going to borrow another $600 billion.
And that amount, the $600 billion, it's a huge number. How much tariff revenue is that really?
To put it in perspective, it's nearly 2 full years worth of tariff collections.
Wow.
So it's a gigantic bet. They are betting that the political win from sending you $2,000 is bigger than any political fight over the budget.
So how does that $600 billion figure connect back to the $2,000 checks for everybody?
It lines up almost perfectly. The math works out. I mean, we're talking about a huge logistical operation here.
Yeah, I'll bet.
The goal is to send $2,000 to about 85% of the population.
Yeah.
That comes out to roughly 284 million people. And if you do the math, $2,000 times that many people is about $568 billion.
So the $600 billion covers it with a little buffer.
Exactly. The funding pool is specifically designed to cover the full cost. It's not an accident.
All right. That makes the funding part much clearer. It's a redirection. Now, let's get to what is, I think, the most critical part for our audience. Eligibility. We have to address the confusion and, honestly, the anxiety that was caused when officials, including the Treasury Secretary, used the phrase working families.
That phrase, it caused immediate panic. We saw it in the comments, the emails. I'm on disability. I can't work. Does this mean I'm left out?
Right. I'm a retiree. I'm not a working family anymore.
And we need to just state this as clearly as possible.
So let's be definitive. Are people on fixed income, Social Security, SSI, SSDI, VA benefits excluded because of that phrase?
No, absolutely not. 100% no. That phrase, working families, is just. It's political jargon, it's shorthand, it's meant to sound inclusive and relatable to a broad audience.
So it doesn't literally mean you have to have a job.
It does not mean you must be currently employed. The administration knows, I mean, they know full well, that excluding seniors and people with disabilities from a major payment like this would be political suicide.
Okay, so if it's not about having a job, what is the actual rule? What's the real criteria they'll use?
Well, it's one thing, your income.
That's it.
That's it. Specifically, your adjusted gross income, or AGI. They are not checking your employment status. They don't care if you have a job. The only question they ask is your income below the cutoff?
And what do we expect that cutoff to be?
Well, nothing is final until a bill is passed, but if we look at the past 3 stimulus rounds and other proposals, all signs point to a threshold of around $75,000 for an individual.
And for a couple.
And $150,000 for a married couple who files their taxes together.
Okay, let's quickly define AGI, because a lot of our listeners might not file taxes, so that term might be new to them.
Right, good point. So adjusted gross income is basically your total gross income minus a few specific deductions. For most people on a fixed income, your AGI would be the taxable part of your Social Security benefits.
Not the whole amount.
No, just the taxable portion. Plus, any pension income, money you take out of a traditional 401k or IRA, things like that.
What about things that aren't taxed?
Critically, non-taxable income doesn't count. So certain VA benefits or the non-taxable part of your Social Security, that's excluded. And that's really helpful because it means your AGI is often much lower than your total cash in hand.
So it's very likely that most people on Social Security or disability will fall well below that $75,000 line.
The vast majority, yes. So if your AGI is below that line, you qualify, period. End of story. The phrase working families is noise. Your AGI is the signal.
And let's just hammer this home with the historical proof, because I think it's the most reassuring thing we can offer.
It really is. The evidence is concrete.
Why are we so confident?
Okay, first, just pure politics. Seniors and retirees are one of the largest, most reliable voting blocs in the country.
They show up to vote.
They absolutely show up, alienating that entire group by denying them a $2,000 check right before an election. It would be, well, it would be politically ridiculous. It would backfire spectacularly.
So there's the political motivation, but there's also the plumbing, right? The system is already built to do
The
that.
plumbing is already there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Look at the last 3 stimulus checks, the $1,200, the $600, the $1,400 payments. In all 3 of those cases, the system was already set up to send money directly to Social Security retirees, to SSDI recipients, to people on SSI, to VA beneficiaries.
Right.
They didn't have to invent a new system. They just used the payment info they already had.
And you even brought up a really specific example from back in 2009.
Yes, this is a perfect historical precedent. Back in May of 2009, during that crisis, the government sent out a special $250 payment, and it went only to Social Security beneficiaries, railroad retirees, and veterans.
So they've specifically targeted this exact group before?
They have. It proves they have the ability and the willingness to do it. So when you hear working families, I want you to replace that little bit of anxiety with the confidence of history. The system is built for you.
It's incredibly clear. Let's talk a bit more about those income thresholds, the 75 and 150,000. What about people who are right on the edge? Say someone makes 76,000. Are they just out of luck?
That's a great question. And no, they're usually not just cut off completely. These kinds of payments almost always use what's called a phase out.
Phase out.
Yeah, so your benefit doesn't just drop from 2,000 to zero the second you make $1 over the limit.
Okay, so how does that work, typically?
Usually, the payment amount starts to decrease gradually over a certain income range. For example, they might reduce the payment by, say, $50 for every $1,000 you earn above that $75,000 threshold.
So someone making 80,000 wouldn't get the full 2,000, but they'd still get something.
Exactly. They might get, say, $1,750 instead. It protects people who are right on that borderline from losing the entire benefit just because they're a little bit over. We fully expect to see a similar phase-out rule for this payment.
That's really helpful. Okay, now let's move to the legal structure of the payment. This is a bit technical, but it's maybe the most important detail for anyone with low or zero taxable income. What is this payment legally?
This is the absolute key to the whole thing. Legally, these stimulus checks, these dividend payments, they are all structured as an advance of a refundable tax credit.
Okay, two big phrases there, advance and refundable tax credit. Let's break down refundable tax credit first.
Right. So think about it like this. A non-refundable tax credit can only lower the taxes you owe. If you owe $500 in taxes, a $2,000 non-refundable credit will wipe out that $500, and the other $1,500 just disappears.
You don't get it back.
You get nothing back. But because this payment is refundable,
It's different.
completely different. A refundable tax credit is treated like actual money you've paid to the government. Even if your income is so low that you owe zero in taxes,
You still get the money.
you still get the full $2,000. The government literally cuts you a check or makes a direct deposit for the full amount.
That is the guarantee. That's the mechanism that makes sure everyone on a fixed income, even with no taxable income, gets the money.
That's the whole ballgame. And the advance part just means they give you the money now based on your status instead of making you wait to claim it on a tax return next year.
Which brings up the next question. What about filing taxes? So many people on fixed incomes don't have to file. Will they need to file a tax return just to get this money?
It is highly, highly unlikely. Just like with the last stimulus rounds, the Treasury and the IRS will get the data they need directly from the Social Security Administration and the VA.
So if you're already getting a federal benefit.
They know who you are. They have your payment information, whether it's a bank account for direct deposit or a mailing address for a check or a direct express card. As long as your income is below the threshold, you should not need to do anything at all. No tax return required.
That is a huge relief to hear. Okay, so we've covered the money, we've covered who gets it. Now, the big question, when? When might this $2,000 actually arrive?
Right, the timing. So the official word coming from the president is that the money is, and this is the quote, likely coming sometime in the middle of next year, or possibly a little bit later than the middle of next year.
Okay, so let's translate middle of next year or a little bit later. What does that mean in terms of months?
We're looking at a window of, say, late summer to early fall of next year.
So not next week.
Definitely not next week. Everyone needs to manage their expectations. This is not immediate. There's a whole legislative process to get through first. This money is not scheduled to arrive in the next few weeks or even couple months.
But let's look at that timing. Late summer or early fall of next year. That's not an accident, is it?
Oh, not at all. You just have to look at the calendar. That timing is perfectly calibrated.
For the midterm elections.
Right before the midterm elections. It is a classic textbook political strategy. You deliver a huge, tangible financial benefit to millions and millions of voters just a couple of months, maybe even a few weeks, before they go to the polls.
And make sure the payment is fresh in their minds.
Top of mind. It's
Yeah.
designed to have maximum political impact.
And we have to keep saying this is still a preliminary plan. It's not law yet. What has to happen for it to become real?
Well, it has to pass through Congress. It'll likely be part of a larger bill, maybe an appropriations bill, or it could be a standalone piece of legislation. That process takes time. Debates, votes. That's why the target is the middle of next year. The final date won't be set in stone until that bill is actually signed into law.
Okay, so that's the planned timeline. But you mentioned an accelerator. What could happen that would make this money show up much faster than the middle of next year?
One thing, really, a major economic
A
shock.
crash.
A crash, a severe recession, a major market downturn, that crash and burn scenario. If that were to happen in the near future, say in the next couple of months.
The political timeline goes out the window.
Completely. The need for emergency fiscal stimulus would override everything else. In that situation, the government's priority shifts from political timing to just getting cash out the door.
And they would move immediately.
Practically immediately. An economic crisis like that triggers an emergency response. You'd see massive money printing, what people call helicopter money, just to stabilize consumer spending and prevent a total collapse.
You've mentioned a number before in a scenario like that, a staggering number.
Yeah.
$15 trillion. Can you put that in context? That sounds astronomical.
It is. And to be clear, that $15 trillion isn't just for stimulus checks.
Okay.
That's an estimate of the total government and central bank intervention that would be needed to stabilize the entire financial system in a crisis on the scale of, say, 2008, but in today's much larger economy.
So that includes bailing out banks, liquidity for markets, everything.
Everything. It's the whole financial war chest. The stimulus checks would be one of the first and most important parts of that, but they'd be a piece of that much larger response. The point is, if the economy hits a wall, this payment becomes almost certain, and it becomes immediate.
Okay, that makes sense. We're talking about a potentially life-changing amount of money here, $2,000. So we have to spend some serious time on safety, security, and financial protections.
This is a top priority, paramount.
Let's start with garnishment. If you owe money to a credit card company or a debt collector, can they just take this money from your bank account?
Great question. Based on all the previous stimulus checks, the answer is almost certainly no. Those payments came with very strong protections against garnishment.
So most creditors couldn't touch it.
For the vast majority of people, yes. Now, there were a few rare exceptions.
What were they?
Things like federally owed back taxes or court-ordered back child support. In those specific cases, the money could sometimes be intercepted. But for your typical debts, credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, the money was protected. We fully anticipate this $2,000 payment will have those same protections built in.
What about other benefits? So many of our listeners rely on programs like SNAP food assistance, Medicaid, or housing assistance. Will getting this $2,000 suddenly make them ineligible for those things?
That's a vital concern, and the answer, again, should be no. Because the payment is legally a tax credit, a one-time thing, it's not treated as regular income for these programs.
So that doesn't count against you.
Right. In the past, the rule was that the stimulus money didn't count as income or as a resource for at least 12 months. The whole point is to help you, not to accidentally kick you off other essential benefits.
And for those on disability who work part-time, what about SGA, the substantial gainful activity limits?
It does not count towards your SGA limit, not at all. This is a federal benefit payment. It is not earned income from a job. Your eligibility for the $2,000 is based on your total AGI, not on how it interacts with SSA's work rules.
Perfect. Now, the big one, scams. The second there's a whisper of thousands of dollars, the scammers just come out of the woodwork. They target seniors. They target vulnerable people. We need to be loud and clear about this.
We have to be. So if you are listening, please commit this to memory. The IRS, the Social Security Administration, the VA, they will never, ever call you, text you, or email you to ask for personal information or money to release your payment.
Never. What are the red flags to look for?
Any message that creates a sense of urgency or fear, your account is frozen, or you must act now to claim your money.
High pressure.
Exactly. Anyone asking you to pay a processing fee or an admin fee to get your benefit, that is always a scam.
What about gift cards?
If anyone, for any reason, tells you to go buy gift cards, Apple, Google Play, Target, whatever, and give them the numbers on the back to pay for something, hang up. It is 100% a scam. Every single time.
So where do people get real, trusted information?
Only from official sources. That means a physical letter in the mail from the IRS or SSA, or a government website that ends in .gov. That's it.
So if you get a suspicious call,
You hang up. You don't argue, you don't engage, just hang up. And if you can, report it. You can call the Social Security Office of the Inspector General hotline to report scams.
Okay, let's say the payment is approved, the dates are announced next year, and for some reason, a listener's payment doesn't arrive, or it's the wrong amount. What should they do?
First thing is, don't panic. With millions of payments going out, there are always some delays, especially if you've recently moved or changed bank accounts.
Your banks is key.
It is. The best place to check for official updates if you're a Social Security recipient is your online My Social Security portal. That will have the most accurate, personalized information for you.
So wait for the official word before assuming it's lost.
Exactly. The government will set up official channels to report missing payments, just like they did before. It'll probably be a tool on the IRS website. But wait for that to be announced. Don't call random numbers or click on suspicious links.
Okay, let's pull back for a moment. How does this $2,000 payment fit into the bigger economic picture? This is just a one-time political fix.
It's a signal. It signals a huge vulnerability in the economy, especially for people on fixed incomes. The fact that the government feels it needs to do a nearly $600 billion direct payment tells you that the normal systems, like the annual COA, aren't enough.
The cost of living adjustment isn't keeping up.
It's not with this kind of sustained inflation. It's a good mechanism, but it lags. This $2,000 payment is an admission that people have fallen behind and need a big, direct boost to catch up.
So if it goes out next year as planned, it's a targeted boost.
It's a targeted boost, but as we talked about, if it gets accelerated because of a crash, it signals something much more serious. It signals that the system itself is in crisis and needs an emergency cash infusion to stay afloat. The fact that they're preparing this tool shows they know that's a possibility.
Let's circle back to that political commitment one last time. They've gone all in on this, the funding source. They've committed so hard, as you said.
They really have. The political capital they've spent just talking about this is immense. They've built up a massive public expectation.
So what happens if they don't deliver?
I think the backlash would be absolutely massive. It would be seen as a colossal failure, a broken promise, especially by seniors and other fixed-income voters who've been told this is for them.
It would be a huge breach of trust.
A profound breach of trust right before an election. For that reason alone, the political pressure to make this happen is just enormous. It strongly suggests that, one way or another, this payment must happen.
That is the crucial context. Okay, let's bring it all together. A final summary of the most important facts.
Yes, let's lock in the key takeaways.
First, the amount. We're talking about a targeted one-time payment of $2,000.
Second, and this is the big one, who qualifies? Social Security retirees, SSDI, SSI, VA beneficiaries, you are included. Please ignore the political jargon like working families.
It's all about your income.
It is only about your adjusted gross income being below the threshold, which we expect to be around $75,000 for an individual and $150,000 for a couple.
Third, the timing. The plan right now is for the middle of next year, late summer, early fall.
But you have to watch the economy. A serious downturn could speed that up significantly, making it almost immediate.
Finally, the protection.
Remember, this is an advanced refundable tax credit. That's the legal structure that guarantees you get the money, even with zero taxable income. And it protects the funds from most creditors and from messing up your other benefits.
We completely understand how critical a payment like this is. It's about dignity. It's about paying the bills without having to choose. It's about providing that stability. We are going to keep tracking every single development.
Every press release, every legislative draft, we'll bring it to you the moment it happens. And that's why we have to encourage you, if this deep dive was helpful, please subscribe to the channel and make sure you turn on your notifications.
It's truly the only way to guarantee you won't miss a critical update on this $2,000 payment or anything else that affects your financial security.
And please, share this with friends, with family, anyone you know who needs this information. And leave your questions in the comments below. We read them all.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the headlines that matter. We have a major financial update to talk about today. It's coming directly from discussions, right inside the Oval Office. Well, we're talking about a potential large-scale payment. Some are saying $2,000, others are just saying thousands of dollars. Yeah. And this isn't just another rumor. The level of public commitment we're seeing from the president, from the Treasury Secretary, it's unusually high.
It really is. And for you, for everyone listening, especially if you're on a fixed income retirees, people receiving SSI, SSDI, the question really splits in two, doesn't it?
Okay.
First, is this money real? Is it concrete? And second, if it is it coming soon or is it just, being dangled out there on a political calendar way off in the future?
Right. The immediate need versus the political game.
That tension is the single biggest thing we need to clear up today.
And we have to get this point across right from the very start. The conversations they're having explicitly cover a huge, huge percentage of the population. So if you get Social Security, if you get SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, and you've been hearing this confusing government speak about working families and getting worried.
Yes, a lot of people are.
Exactly. We're going to spend a good amount of time today taking those fears apart piece by piece with facts and history and just basic political logic. You are not being left out of this conversation.
And we're also going to dive deep into the mechanics of this thing. I mean, how they plan to pay for it. A $2,000 payment? That's nearly $600 billion.
$600 billion.
The plan is to fund it all through tariff revenue, which, well, it creates a huge logistical puzzle. It's a massive reprioritization of how the government spends its money. And that's why the timeline is so uncertain, even though, as you said, the commitment from lawmakers feels overwhelming right now.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack these brand new statements. We'll clarify the sheer size of this plan, analyze the two very different timelines, the political one and the economic one, and most importantly, we're going to give you the straight facts you need about whether you're eligible for this money. So let's get into it.
Welcome.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are jumping right into the latest official statements on this proposed financial distribution. It's being called a few different things, right? A dividend payment, a rebate.
Right, but functionally, it's a stimulus check. The goal is to put cash directly into people's hands.
And our source material is as fresh as it gets. We're talking about statements made by the president just today, plus comments that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made over the weekend. So we're getting a really complete picture of where the administration stands right now.
And that combination is so important. You have the president's direct remarks, the big picture, and then the Treasury Secretary's perspective, which gives you the financial nuts and bolts. But what's really fascinating to me is the speed and the intensity of it all. It's not just one or two officials anymore. We're hearing from high-profile lawmakers. We're hearing from senators, the economic advisor, the Treasury Secretary himself. They're all giving updates almost every single day on this $2,000 idea.
It feels like they're all singing from the same song sheet, which is rare.
It is. And that intensity, it suggests that the political price for not doing it is already huge. After this much public talk, after all these promises, I mean, politically, logistically, it almost has to be a certain thing at this point. The train has left the station.
Okay, so let's unpack the heart of the plan. This potential $2,000 payment and, as you said, the surprisingly tricky way they plan to fund it.
Let's do it.
First, the benefit itself. A $2,000 lump sum payment for an individual. For families, we're talking thousands of dollars. For so many people right now, especially on fixed incomes, where the COLA increases just aren't keeping up with inflation, this isn't pocket change.
Not at all. It's breathing room. It's help with groceries that cost a fortune or prescription copays. It's real life-stabilizing relief.
And the administration is being very careful with their language, calling it a dividend or a rebate.
They are. The idea is to frame it as returning money to the public, not just printing it out of nowhere. But it's the sheer scale of it that makes the financing so difficult.
Yeah.
To really get why this has been such a challenge, you have to look at their funding source, tariff revenue. The plan is to take a huge chunk of that money, about $600 billion, and send it straight out as these payments.
That's a huge shift. So if they're only using tariffs, we need to understand what that $600 billion means compared to what they normally collect. What does that actually look like?
Well, this is what puts the whole challenge into perspective. Let's do the math from the sources. To send $2,000 checks to their target audience, which is about 85% of the population, or roughly 284 million people, they need something like $568 billion.
So they just rounded up to $600 billion.
Exactly. Now, compare that to normal operations. In a typical year, the U.S. brings in about $350 billion from all tariffs combined.
Hold on. If they need $600 billion, but they only collect $350 billion a year, that's almost 2 full years of tariff money.
That's it exactly. They would have to dedicate nearly 2 full years' worth of incoming trade revenue just for this one single program. And you have to remember, that's not money that's just sitting in a spare stimulus fund.
Right, it's already spoken for.
It's critical for the rest of the federal budget. It pays for everything from infrastructure projects to defense spending to, just paying interest on the national debt. So when you reallocate $600 billion, you create this massive immediate hole in the general budget.
Which then has to be filled somehow.
Right. Either by moving money from other departments, which is politically very difficult, or, and this is more likely, just by increasing the deficit. This whole logistical mess is why the sources are saying the administration is still, quote, winning it. They don't have a fully written, detailed proposal yet.
Which brings up a really important question. You said there's this huge commitment from the top. If the funding is this hard, if it requires this much planning, why are they talking about it so much in public? Why announce it before all the details are locked down?
Because the politics of it create this self-fulfilling pressure. Think about it. If the president, the Treasury Secretary, the economic advisor, if they all go out and publicly promise a $2,000 payment over and over again,
The cost of not delivering becomes catastrophic.
exactly. The political fallout would be severe. The sources say it would create a lot of very, very upset people. At this point, the cost of backing out is probably higher than the cost of just figuring out the messy funding part.
So the constant updates, the daily press hits,
Yeah.
they're a kind of commitment insurance. They're building up public expectation to basically force their own hand.
That's a great way to put it.
But let me play skeptic for a second here. If the plan is still preliminary and the math is hard, what happens if they fail? What if they can't deliver the full $2,000 or they have to delay it again and again?
The sources are pretty clear on that. Any failure to deliver on the promised scale and timeline would just crush public trust, especially for lower income folks and people on fixed incomes who are hanging on every one of these updates. If they came out and said, sorry, it's only going to be 1,000, it would be seen as a major betrayal. It would turn a logistical problem into a massive political crisis.
So the PR strategy they're using, it signals their intent, but it also creates this huge liability if they can't actually pull it off.
An enormous liability. So for now, we have to assume they are 100% dedicated to finding that $600 billion, even if the when of it all is still up in the air.
And that brings us perfectly to the biggest question of all, the timing. When exactly could people expect to see this money?
Right? And there are two very different answers to that question.
Let's start with the official one. I'm going to relay the president's statement from today directly about the timeline. He said the money is, quote, likely coming sometime in the middle of next year, or possibly a little bit later than the middle of next year.
Okay, so let's break that down. Middle of next year means summer. A little bit later could mean late summer, early fall. And that timing aligns perfectly. And I mean, it is perfectly aligned with the political calendar.
You're talking about the midterm elections.
Of course. That timeline puts the distribution of these checks right smack in the window just before the midterms.
And we should be clear, as analysts, we're not making a political comment here. We're just pointing out a historical pattern.
It's just a recognized trend. It's a fact. If you look back at the big stimulus payments, that $1,400 check, even parts of the $600 one, they were timed with a very keen eye on major elections. The source material is very blunt about it. They call it a vote-gathering exercise. It's a proven strategy. You provide a big financial boost right before a major election using, taxpayer or tariff funds to build up goodwill.
And the fact that the administration is comfortable saying that timeline out loud, middle of next year, that's almost an admission of the strategy itself.
It really is. It signals that this is the plan.
Okay, but let's push back on that a little. For the sake of our listeners on fixed incomes who are struggling right now, if this is all about getting votes, why would they target reliable voters? Seniors, retirees, but they're already a very reliable voting bloc. Wouldn't it make more sense politically to focus the money on younger, less reliable voters to try and boost turnout there?
That is an excellent question, and it gets at a deeper level of the political math here. It's about more than just trying to convert non-voters. It's also about affirmation and scale. So yes, seniors are reliable voters, but they're also a massive organized bloc that is feeling the most acute financial pain right now because their incomes are fixed.
So you're saying it's about shoring up your base.
It's about shoring up your base, and it's about the sheer scale of the payment. These payments are designed to be broad. By including the fixed income community, they make sure the money touches nearly every household in the country in some way. You get huge political capital by rewarding a reliable bloc while also reaching the wider electorate, trying to exclude them just to chase a few new voters. It's a huge risk for a very small reward. The sources are clear. The scale is what gives it political power.
So the default plan, the political plan, is for mid-next year, assuming the economy stays stable.
Right.
But you mentioned there's a huge wild card in all of this, a massive contingency that could speed everything up, the economic uncertainty factor.
Yes, this is the big one. That mid-next year timeline is only the plan if the economy is considered fine, or at least stable enough for the next 8 months or so. But there is an immediate catastrophic trigger that changes everything. If the economy, quote, crashes and burns in the next few weeks or months, the sources say the money would go out practically immediately.
That is a critical distinction.
Yeah.
But what does crashes and burns actually mean? We can't just leave it as a vague term. What are the specific economic signs they'd be looking for?
That's the key question. The president didn't list specific triggers today, but the economists cited in our sources suggest we should be watching for 3 main indicators. First, a rapid jump in the unemployment rate. If it spikes up over, say, 5.5%, 6% in just a month or two, that's a huge red flag.
Okay.
Second, 2 straight quarters of negative GDP growth. That's the textbook definition of a recession. And third would be some kind of major instability in the banking system or the housing market, something that signals a systemic crisis is brewing. If any one of those things happens, or even if there's just a really severe slowdown that feels like a recession, which frankly a lot of people think we're already in, that becomes the catalyst. That's what forces them to distribute the money immediately and forget all about the political timing.
And if they do have to pivot to an emergency distribution because the economy collapses,
Yeah.
the whole plan changes, right? The funding, the scale. The source material mentioned a whole lot of money printing and helicopter money. We need to explain what that actually means for people listening.
This is absolutely crucial context. When we're talking about funding through tariffs, that's the slow, politically timed plan. When we're talking about an emergency response, we are talking about a totally different beast. We're talking about direct monetary intervention from the central bank. Helicopter money might sound a little silly, but it's a real term economists use. It was popularized by Milton Friedman, and it describes an emergency action where newly created money is injected directly into the economy, into the hands of the public.
It's like it's literally being dropped from a helicopter.
Exactly. It's a last resort measure to fight off deflation and spark demand when just cutting interest rates isn't enough.
So how would this emergency approach compare to what we saw during the pandemic?
The language in the sources is very, very strong on this point. During the pandemic, the total response involved printing something like $6 trillion, which was unprecedented. The analysis suggests that if the next economic crisis is seen as being deeper or more severe than the COVID lockdown crisis, the government's response could actually dwarf that. The context is, if $6 trillion felt nuts a few years ago, the next response could be significantly larger. Some projections are even throwing around numbers as high as $15 trillion in new stimulus.
Wow.
It just shows that if the economy really does falter, they are prepared to act with immense, overwhelming force almost overnight. And that would pull the timeline for these payments from mid-next year to, practically right now.
Okay, this is a perfect pivot to what is probably the #1 cause of anxiety for our listeners, eligibility. Over the weekend, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this money would be for working families. And that one phrase, it caused immediate panic among fixed income recipients. Retirees, people on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, they heard that and thought, well, that's not me. I'm not working. I'm out.
And we have to address that fear directly, with absolute clarity. Please, if you're listening, do not let that language discourage you or worry you. The phrase working families it's political shorthand. It's government jargon. It has, and I want to be very clear, nothing to do with whether you are currently employed and drawing a paycheck.
It's a broad catch-all term.
It's a term designed to signal that the money is going to productive members of society. And receiving Social Security is an earned benefit. You worked for it. You are absolutely part of that demographic.
So if I'm a retiree listening to this, or I'm on SSI, I should just mentally translate working families to families who are under a certain income level.
Precisely. That is exactly right. The true and the only determining factor for your eligibility will be your income, not your work status. The government has no system, and certainly no desire, to try and audit your current employment for a broad payment like this. If you are retired, if you are disabled, if you're a survivor, your eligibility is all about your adjusted gross income, or AGI.
So let's get into those income numbers based on the sources. The administration has thrown around the figure under $100,000, but history tells us it will probably be a bit lower than that.
That's right. The general consensus is that 100,000 is more of a political talking point, to signal that millionaires aren't getting checks. But the final practical income cap will almost certainly be lower, just so the money is more targeted to the people who will actually spend it and stimulate the economy. The expectation is that the final limits will look a lot like the last stimulus rounds,
Which were roughly $75,000 for a single person.
and 150,000 for a married couple filing their taxes together.
So for the vast majority of our listeners on fixed incomes, it boils down to one simple question. Is your total annual income, including your Social Security and any other money, below that $75,000 or $150,000 line?
And if the answer to that is yes, then all the other language from the Treasury Secretary doesn't matter. You are eligible. Retirees, SSI recipients, SSDI recipients, VA beneficiaries, you are all included if you meet that income test. We really have to tune out the panic from vague political words and just focus on the technical facts.
And this goes right back to the political logic we were talking about before. Let's just hammer this point one more time, because I think it's the most reassuring thing we can say. If this payment is timed to influence an election, what would be the political reality of excluding fixed income recipients?
It would be political suicide. I mean, it would be completely destructive when you look at who votes in this country. Seniors, retirees, Social Security beneficiaries. They are one of the largest, most engaged, and most reliable voting blocs there is, period.
They show up.
They always show up. So to design this massive, expensive handout to generate goodwill right before an election and then deliberately exclude that huge, powerful group, the sources say that's just not a realistic scenario. It's politically impossible. Any politician who proposed that would face an immediate and severe backlash.
And this isn't just a theory, right? We have three very clear, very recent examples to back this up.
Exactly. This isn't guesswork. The three big stimulus checks in 2020 and 2021, the $1,200, the $600, and the $1,300 payments, every single one of them included every major fixed income group: Social Security retirees, people on disability, SSDI and SSI survivors, VA beneficiaries. They were all included as long as they were under the income limit. And since they were included all three times before using the same basic system, the expectation has to be that they'll be included again.
Okay, now let's get into some of the technical details. I know tax rules can sound a little dry, but understanding the actual mechanism they use to send this money is the key. It's the reason why people on fixed incomes, even people who don't file taxes, are included automatically.
This technical definition is really the core protection for our audience. A stimulus check isn't legally defined as some kind of, random government handout. It is officially structured as an advance of a refundable tax credit that is tied to your federal tax return.
Okay, let's spend a minute on that, because the difference between refundable and non-refundable is everything. That one word is the firewall that protects fixed income recipients.
It is. Let's start with a normal tax credit, a non-refundable one. That kind of credit can only lower the amount of tax you owe down to zero. So if you owe $1,000 in taxes, a $1,000 credit is great. It wipes out your bill. But if your income is so low you owe zero in taxes, you get nothing. The credit is worthless to you.
Right. Now, what about the stimulus mechanism?
The stimulus uses a refundable tax credit. And this is the magic key. A refundable credit means it can reduce your tax bill below zero. Even if your total income is so low that you owe $0 in federal taxes, which is the case for many people living only on Social Security or SSI, you still get the full amount of the credit as a cash refund check. The government is, in effect, fronting you the cash no matter what your tax bill is.
And that's the legal structure that ensures low-income people who aren't working, in the traditional sense, still get paid.
That's it. And it directly answers that other huge question we always get. I don't file a tax return because my income is too low. Will I still get the money?
And the answer, based on the last three rounds, is a clear yes.
Yes. Receiving the payment is tied to your income being below the line, not to the physical act of filing a tax form. What happened in 2020 and 2021 is that the Social Security Administration, the VA, and other agencies shared their payment data directly with the IRS. That allowed the IRS to just automatically process and send out direct deposits or paper checks to beneficiaries, even if they hadn't filed a tax return in years. The system is built to find and pay people who are outside the normal tax filing system.
Now, it's worth noting that while this refundable tax credit is the standard way to do a big, broad stimulus, the government has used other, more targeted methods in the past.
They have, yes. The sources point to one example back in May of 2009. There was a dedicated $250 economic recovery payment that was sent specifically and only to Social Security beneficiaries. So it shows they have the ability to do these very targeted payments. But because this current plan involves the whole population and this whole tariff revenue idea, the refundable tax credit is almost certainly the path they'll take. The infrastructure is already there.
Okay, finally on the mechanics, we have to talk about garnishment. This is a big deal. Normally, fixed income benefits are very protected from debt collectors. But the stimulus checks were sometimes a different story. What should people be watching for?
This is a really vital point. You're right, Social Security benefits are generally protected from being garnished by private debt collectors. But with the last stimulus payments, Congress didn't pass specific laws to protect those particular checks, so they were sometimes treated differently. There were a few rare but very important exceptions where the money could be seized.
Who are they?
The two main vulnerabilities were, first, garnishment for back taxes that you owed directly to the IRS itself. If you owe the IRS, they can take it. And second, garnishment for back child support payments. And we should also just quickly mention the other non-garnishment issues. If you were claimed as an adult dependent on someone else's tax return, you wouldn't get a check. Or if your funds are managed by a representative payee who, mismanages the money, those are other ways the payment could be missed.
So the big takeaway here is that while most people got the money with no problem, there were these loopholes for things like back taxes and child support. And we'll have to see if Congress adds specific protections this time.
Exactly. Until a law is passed to explicitly protect this specific payment, that risk is still there. But the overall message for the vast majority of fixed income beneficiaries is clear. You are included, and the system is designed to get the money to you.
We have gone through a ton of detail today. So before we wrap up, let's do a quick high-level summary. Let's reinforce the core facts from the administration's latest statements and our analysis.
Okay, let's boil it down to the certainties and the variables. The certain part. The payment is likely $2,000, maybe more for families. The political commitment to do something is overwhelming, and the funding plan is ambitious, right? Nearly $600 billion from tariffs.
And the variable part is the timeline, which is split into two very different possibilities. Possibility one is the political timeline.
Right. That's the default plan. Assuming the economy holds steady, the money comes in the middle of next year, timed for the midterms.
And then there's possibility two, the economic timeline.
The wild card. If the economy takes a nosedive in the coming months, that distribution speeds up dramatically. It becomes an emergency stimulus, and it happens practically immediately, likely with a lot of newly created money.
And let's restate the most important reassurance for everyone listening who is on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits.
Your eligibility is based on your income. That's it. It will likely be around $75,000 for an individual, $150,000 for a married couple. It is not based on your employment status. The legal structure, the historical precedent, and the political reality all point in the same direction. Fixed income recipients are expected to be fully included. So please, do not let vague terms like working families cause you any stress. If your income is below the line, you are included.
Let's also talk about scams for a moment. While we're all waiting for this to play out, this is when the scammers come out of the woodwork. What should our listeners be watching out for?
This is so important. Every time a payment like this is discussed, the scams explode. So let us be extremely blunt. The IRS, the Social Security Administration, the VA, they will never call you. They will never text you. They will never email you asking for your personal information or your bank account details for this payment.
Never.
It will not happen. These agencies only communicate through official letters mailed to your address on file or through the secure government websites like the My Social Security portal. If you get a call, a text, or an email, it's a scam. Do not engage. Do not click any links. And please tell your friends and family the same thing.
Okay, so final thoughts on all this.
Yeah.
We have this really frustrating situation, right? This high level of commitment, but this deep uncertainty about the timeline.
It is frustrating. The waiting is stressful. But I think the forces pushing this payment forward are just immense. You have the overwhelming political pressure on one side, and on the other, you have the very real possibility of an economic downturn that would force their hand. When you combine those two things, it strongly, strongly suggests that some kind of significant payment is going to happen within the next 12 months. We just need to watch the economic news very closely because that's the wild card that could change the timeline overnight.
And that's really the essential message we want to leave you with today. For so many of you, these potential payments aren't just a number. They represent real stability. They can provide that crucial breathing room, help you catch up on bills, or just offer a little bit of dignity during what are very tight financial times. And that's true whether the reason it comes is political or economic. We are tracking every single update on this, and we will be right back here the moment a definitive plan is announced.
So continue to monitor all the official communications. Be prepared for that political timeline next year, but just stay aware that economic events could accelerate everything very suddenly.
We really encourage you to keep following these updates. If this deep dive gave you some clarity and maybe a little peace of mind, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it. Share it with your friends, your family members, anyone on a fixed income who needs these facts right now. We really appreciate you joining us for this comprehensive deep dive.
Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cutting through all the noise. We are not talking about, speculation or some political whispers.
No, not at all.
We're talking about something much more solid, cold, hard, public confirmation. We've seen this synchronized effort by the White House to really double down on a potential $2,000 financial payment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's aimed directly at American families. So this really isn't just a rumor anymore. It feels like an executive mandate.
That's exactly the right way to put it. That is the key distinction here. We have moved entirely past let's call it the idea phase.
Right.
The commitment we're seeing is, frankly, it's stunning. And it's coming straight from the top. We're seeing the administration's most influential figures. I mean, you're talking about the economic advisor, the Treasury Secretary, and the chief messenger, the press secretary.
All of them.
All of them, in just a matter of days, confirming that they are not only, researching this, but they're actively mapping out how to disperse this $2,000.
And here's the part that I think makes this whole proposal so politically unique and, frankly, economically fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It's the source of the funds.
Yeah, the funding mechanism.
Exactly. They are promising to pay for this whole thing entirely using existing tariff revenue.
Mm-hmm.
They are framing it as, a cost-neutral measure?
That's the term, yeah. Stating explicitly that it won't dig into the rest of the budget. And that, right there, it just reframes the entire discussion we usually have around financial relief.
It really does.
That funding mechanism, it changes everything. It's an explicit attempt to, neutralize opposition from the deficit hawks.
Sure.
And it signals a very specific type of political resolve that, honestly, we haven't seen since maybe the initial rounds of pandemic aid.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to synthesize and analyze all 5 pieces of evidence that have come out. We've got 3 high-profile video clips and 2 immediate presidential social media posts. We want to show you exactly how real this $2,000 payment has become. And maybe even more importantly, what the critical, non-negotiable next step is that needs to happen for you to actually see it.
That's the key.
For those of you relying on some financial stability right now, this information is absolutely vital. The evidence trail it's just far stronger than a lot of people might realize.
I think so, too.
Okay, so let's get started. Let's really try to define the scale of this commitment. Because when the White House commits to a specific dollar amount, $2,000, and a specific funding stream, especially when they do it repeatedly and across different cabinet roles, that signals an intention that is, it's pretty difficult to walk back from. Our sources are confirming that over a really short period, the administration has shown this massive, very public commitment to getting this payment out.
And for any measure of this financial magnitude, a $2,000 payment that could potentially reach tens of millions of families, the level of rapid, high-level, and synchronized discussion we've seen is extremely telling. This isn't, some random cabinet secretary floating an idea at a press conference. This is a unified policy front. It's coordinated.
And for so many families, $2,000 right now is. It's the difference. It's the difference between keeping up with bills or falling behind. It's not just a political number floating around out there. For a lot of people, it's a critical lifeline.
It really is.
And that's why we need to unpack just how serious these claims are and the political pressure the administration is now under to deliver.
And that pressure, that brings us to what the source material called the urgency of commitment. which I think is a great phrase.
It is.
By talking about this payment so frequently and so publicly, the administration is effectively painting themselves into an extremely tight corner.
That analogy is just.
Yeah.
It's spot on. They are defining the terms of success for themselves publicly. If they go out and they repeatedly promise a $2,000 dividend.
And they have.
And they confirm that their top economic team is diligently studying the funding and, who gets it. The public expectation for them to actually follow through becomes immense.
Precisely. Because if they fail to deliver on a promise that is now so specifically detailed, we've got the amount, $2,000, the funding, tariffs, the target, sub-$100,000 families, the risk is a really significant erosion of public trust.
Yeah, massive disappointment.
Massive disappointment. They're actively digging in on this proposal, which suggests to me they genuinely believe they have a viable and, importantly, a legal path to implementation, even if it requires a tricky legislative maneuver to get there.
Okay, so for this deep dive, I'm here to guide you through the raw evidence. We're going to look at the specific quotes, the context of these video clips, and the timeline of how these statements came out.
And I'm here to provide the synthesis, the deep analysis, and the context you need to understand why these orchestrated, high-profile statements are just fundamentally different from, your typical political rhetoric. So let's look at the sheer weight of these sources.
All right, let's unpack this crucial evidence trail. Because this commitment, it isn't just coming from one person, from one source. It's more like a triangulation of high-level administrative power.
That's a good way to describe it.
We've established these 5 distinct data points that all sort of materialized within just a few days of each other. 3 video clips featuring these critical officials, and then 2 separate presidential social media posts that basically confirm the mandate.
And when you have the economic advisor, the treasury secretary, and the press secretary all echoing the exact same specific policy mandate, well, it indicates a singular executive level priority. This is what a policy rollout looks like. It's not a political leak.
No, this is deliberate. We have to start with the man who holds the calculator.
Kevin Hassett.
Kevin Hassett, the administration's chief economic advisor. His role here is paramount because at the end of the day, he's the one who has to determine the viability and the technical feasibility of paying out billions and billions of dollars.
Right. And Hassett's testimony, from the clips we've seen, it provided 2 absolutely pivotal pieces of information that really defined the entire scope of this proposal.
Okay, so what's the first one?
First, he was very clear that this is, and I'm quoting, something that will require legislation. And that immediately tempers expectations, right? This is not an executive fiat. It's not something the president can do on his own. It necessitates congressional approval. And that, right there, is a crucial insight into the legislative path forward.
Okay, that's huge. That sets the stage for everything else. So what was the second piece?
The second piece was the budget justification. This is the political core of the entire plan. He directly confirmed that, based on the current volume of tariff revenue coming in, there would be, and again, I'm quoting him, enough money to pay for the $2,000 checks. And he did that by saying they would utilize those specific funds, ensuring they do not go into the rest of the budget.
So he's building a firewall around this money.
He is. That statement, coming from the foremost numbers cruncher in the White House, is the conceptual foundation for this whole thing. It attempts to shield the $2,000 dividend from criticism by framing it as revenue redistribution.
Not as spending.
Exactly. It makes it budget neutral in the context of general federal spending. And that's where the political genius of the plan lies, right? It's a direct appeal to lawmakers who would otherwise refuse to support any proposal that adds to the national debt.
And his current activity, what he's actually doing right now, that confirms the priority level too. Hassett didn't just speak theoretically. He stated, very plainly, that he is actively studying the matter and getting the numbers straight so the president has all the choices he needs to decide what to do.
Right.
That's not a vague goal. That's a description of ongoing, detailed technical research. They're looking at implementation models right now.
It means the policy is past the conceptual stage, and it's currently in the, let's call it the engineering phase.
I like that.
The question is no longer if it can be done, but how it can be done. How can it be done efficiently, legally, and within the constraints of that tariff revenue?
Okay, so moving along this commitment chain, we next look at the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. His involvement sort of reinforces the plan from the other side, the implementation and disbursement side.
Yes. Bessent's discussion was critical. because he was the one who was really challenged on the financial responsibility aspect of it. Whether using tariff revenue specifically for this purpose was really just shuffling debt around.
Classic budgetary shell game.
Exactly. And while he navigated that complex budgetary metaphor pretty carefully, his main commitment remained resolute.
He didn't make excuses or try to deflect. Besson confirmed the White House is exploring all legal options to get that done, and that they are looking into it intensively. And while he couldn't provide a firm timeline, which, is understandable given that legislative hurdle we just talked about, getting that commitment from their office that's responsible for actually processing the payments, that is a huge sign of momentum.
It really is. I mean, the Treasury Secretary's office is the engine of disbursement. When he confirms they are exploring legal options, it implies they are likely looking at the most efficient ways to use existing government infrastructure.
So, like previous rebate programs.
Probably something very similar to that. They want to minimize delays, minimize bureaucracy. The last thing they want is to have to create a massive new administrative system, because that would just slow down delivery and add to the overall cost.
Okay, makes sense.
Oh.
And then finally, we have the official confirmation from the top, from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. Her voice, it represents the unified policy direction of the entire administration.
And Leavitt provided the necessary political capstone all this. She definitively stated that the White House is, quote, committed to making that happen.
And what was her reasoning?
It was simple. It was driven by the fact that the president made it clear he wants to make it happen. This is the messenger confirming the mandate directly to the public. There's no ambiguity there.
So when you stack those three officials up, you have Hassett confirming the math and the need for legislation.
Mm-hmm.
You have Besson confirming the financial mechanism and the legal exploration.
Right.
And then Leavitt confirming the executive mandate. And this all happens within a few days. It's just an extraordinary show of coordination. It transcends mere political talk. It suggests a highly motivated, high-priority project is underway.
Absolutely. It's a full-court press.
So now that we've established this deep commitment and the unified executive intent behind the $2,000 payment, we need to pivot to the two most critical details for you, the listener.
Right. Who gets it and how is it paid for?
Exactly. Who actually qualifies and how exactly does this tariff revenue system work?
And the eligibility question is, it's often the most confusing part of any aid proposal, isn't it? The initial announcement used very broad, very sweeping language. But the subsequent high-level discussions, they provided the critical specificity we needed to understand the policy's real target audience.
Okay, so let's break that down. The president's original announcement spoke of a $2,000 dividend to everybody except high-income people.
Mm-hmm. Classic political language.
It is. It sounds universal, while at the same time promising to exclude those who, presumably don't need it. But what does high income actually mean in a policy context? It can mean anything.
And this is where the clarification provided by the officials is so invaluable. During the discussions, Treasury Secretary Besson, he provided a crucial data point. He mentioned that the rebate would be aimed at families making less than, say, $100,000.
Okay, say $100,000. The difference between the general promise of everybody and that specific figure is monumental.
It's huge.
A $100,000 family income threshold, while it's still certainly more targeted than a truly universal check, it makes the policy much clearer. It focuses the relief squarely on the middle and upper middle class, in addition to lower income households.
And we have to stop and scrutinize that one word, say.
Right. I was going to ask about that.
The source mentioned Besson used the phrase, say $100,000. In policy discussions, that word is often a very strategic qualifier.
It gives them wiggle room.
A lot of wiggle room. It means they have identified $100,000 as the preferred internal benchmark for eligibility, but they are giving themselves flexibility. It suggests this is the current starting point for negotiations.
So the administration is internally focused on that $100,000 number, but by using say, it prevents them from being locked in if, for example, they need to lower the threshold to maybe $80,000 to save on costs.
Or raise it.
Or raise it slightly, yeah. To maybe $120 to win some key congressional votes in those high cost of living areas. It's a calculated ambiguity that allows for legislative maneuvering down the line.
That's it, exactly. It suggests the scope is intended to be generous, but the final legally binding number might shift based on final tariff revenue calculations or, just raw political necessity.
So it's crucial for you to understand that the $100,000 figure, it represents the administration's stated intent, but it's not yet etched into law.
Not at all. It's the target.
Okay. Let's move on to the tariff revenue strategy. This is the most distinguishing element of this whole plan. Why are they choosing tariffs specifically, and what's the political strategy behind that choice?
Well, the core proposal is, as you said, brilliant in its simplicity and its political framing. The idea is to use tariff revenues, which are essentially just taxes collected on imports, to fund the dividend. And Kevin Hassett's reasoning confirms the political motivation here. Using this specific revenue stream ensures the cost is covered without affecting the existing general federal budget.
This strategy basically transforms the payment from being stimulus or aid, which is typically funded by future debt,
Right.
into a dividend or a rebate funded by existing incoming revenue. This is a critical rebranding exercise.
It is extremely appealing to budget hawks, regardless of their political affiliation. They're making the argument that money that came into the government coffers is simply being redistributed out to the people who paid the cost of those tariffs, either directly or indirectly through higher consumer prices.
So it's like a refund.
In a way, yes. By walling off the tariff money, they position this as fiscally responsible redistribution rather than new deficit spending.
Now, this is where we had to introduce some intellectual friction, as the critique suggested. The person who originally vetted these sources and compiled all this information, they made a very interesting observation. They noted that when they tried to calculate the year-over-year tariff numbers against the cost of this payout, they found that, and I'm quoting, it doesn't really add up, and that it doesn't make sense to fully fund the proposal this way.
This is the single most important conflict embedded within all the source material, and we absolutely must analyze it.
It's a huge discrepancy.
It is. On one side, you have this external calculation suggesting the math is insufficient, that maybe the current tariff receipts just aren't enough to cover $2,000 for millions and millions of families below $100,000.
Okay.
But on the other side, you have Kevin Hassett, the White House economic advisor, stating unequivocally, based on his internal numbers, that it works.
So who do you believe? We can't just dismiss the external skepticism, but we also can't just dismiss Hassett's claim. If the numbers don't add up externally, what are the possible explanations for Hassett's confidence?
Well, there are a few possibilities. One, Hassett might be relying on projected tariff revenue growth.
Future money.
Exactly. He might be anticipating much higher collections over the next 12 to 18 months that just haven't materialized yet in the public data. That's one possibility.
Okay, what's another one?
Two, the eligibility threshold might end up being much narrower than the, say, 100,000 that Besson mentioned.
So fewer people would qualify.
Right, meaning Hassett's calculation might assume a lower number of total recipients, which would make the per-person math work out. Maybe the final number is 75,000, not 100.
Or 3. And this is maybe the most cynical interpretation. Hassett is defining budget neutral very, very narrowly.
How so?
Perhaps meaning it's neutral only within that dedicated tariff fund. But that fund might still need a transfer or a boost from another government account that isn't being publicly acknowledged yet.
That's a very real possibility. And that third point is exactly why we have to maintain neutrality here. For the purpose of policy tracking, we report the administration's claim. The official stance is that the tariff revenue is sufficient and it will serve as the sole funding mechanism.
Right.
However, you have to understand that the viability of the entire proposal hinges on that specific mathematical claim holding true under congressional scrutiny. If Hassett's math is proven wrong in hearings,
The whole thing falls apart.
the entire political justification for the plan collapses, and it will almost certainly stall in the legislature.
Okay. Finally, to synthesize this whole commitment, we have to look at the president's own actions. We have the 2 social media posts that were shared in the source material, and they provide undeniable evidence of a sustained executive-level focus.
These posts are the ultimate proof of concept. The Sunday post contained the original specific declaration, at least $2,000 in the form of a dividend paid to everybody except high-income people. That was the shot fired across the bow.
And then the Monday post, which confirmed that the president immediately doubled down on the payment just 24 hours later. And in the world of high-stakes politics, where statements are so often quickly refined or even walked back, for him to confirm the announcement the very next day, that shows it was not a mistake. It wasn't a trial balloon. It was a firm, deliberate, executive intention.
When you put it all together, the numbers man, the disbursement man, the messenger, and the chief executive all pushing the exact same $2,000 tariff-funded message. It shows a level of coordination that rarely, if ever, happens by accident. Which brings us, of course, to the biggest hurdle of all, the legislative path and the political momentum. We've established the executive commitment, but commitment alone doesn't print checks.
No, it does not.
We need to talk about the actual mechanisms of getting this proposal through Congress.
So let's just confirm the current status based on what Hassett testified to. Nothing is approved yet.
Right. Still in the works. The matter remains in discussion. That means the internal research on the viability and the legal options is ongoing, but the legislative clock hasn't fully started ticking yet.
And as Hassett clearly stated, the bottleneck is congressional action. He confirmed this will need to be out of Congress. This is such a crucial distinction. The White House is providing the mandate and the funding blueprint, but Congress, and only Congress, holds the key to implementation.
And the legislative process is, well, it's complex. Even a seemingly budget-neutral proposal like this can get stalled by disagreements over the fine print.
Like the eligibility definition.
Exactly. Does $100,000 mean adjusted gross income? Does it mean total household income? How are dependents counted? Are single filers capped at 50 or 60,000? All of these details must be debated and then codified into law.
But what's fascinating here is the potential political softening that the source material seems to point toward. They mentioned seeing information that lawmakers are warming up to the idea of these $2,000 payments.
And this suggests that the budget-neutral framing is having the desired effect.
It's working.
It's working. Lawmakers who might otherwise oppose large relief packages on fiscal grounds now have a politically palatable way to vote yes. If the public is enthusiastic about a $2,000 dividend, and the administration provides this novel funding source, the tariffs, lawmakers can support it without carrying the political baggage of being seen to increase the national debt.
So the political resistance seems to be softening, but that legislative step is still the critical bottleneck. The administration's doing its homework, they're exploring legal options, but until a bill is actually introduced, debated, and passed, the payment remains a very high probability, but not a certainty.
It is an extremely high probability, I would argue, simply because the administration has made the promise so public. As the source notes, the high volume of talk creates a pretty high likelihood. However,
There's always a however.
There is. Congress gains significant leverage by controlling the legislative process. They can demand changes to that $100,000 eligibility cap, or they could try to divert the tariff funds to other purposes entirely. That's always a risk.
We also need to clarify the nature of this payment because the terms are often used interchangeably. Is this a stimulus check, a rebate, or a dividend? What's the difference?
In this context, the administration is being very specific. They're using the term dividend precisely because of the funding source.
Okay.
A stimulus is typically broad aid designed to spur economic activity, and it's often funded by debt. A rebate is usually a return of overpaid taxes. A dividend, in this specific framing, is a share of government revenue, in this case tariff revenue being paid out to the people.
So the distinction is purely political.
Yeah.
By calling it a $2,000 one-time dividend or rebate, they're clearly positioning it as relief paid out from a specific revenue stream.
Right. And it's designed to offer some breathing room rather than being a permanent structural entitlement change. This sets the expectation. This is a one-time event. This is not a recurring annual benefit. And it completely avoids the complex, lengthy legislative process that would be required to reform long-term entitlement programs. This is designed to be fast, targeted relief, even if fast still means waiting for Congress to act.
Right. Okay, so moving into the analysis of the financial implications, we have to acknowledge a constraint here. The source material gave us zero detail on critical factors like, is this taxable?
Yay.
What's the specific payment timing? Is it protected from garnishment by debt collectors?
All unknown.
So we have to limit our discussion to the one financial mechanism that was explicitly confirmed by the officials.
Which is the intended budget neutrality. This is the cornerstone of the entire proposal, so it's worth digging into.
Let's drill down on the significance of funding this thing entirely with tariff revenue. Why does budget neutrality matter so much for the political life of this proposal?
It matters because it neutralizes the primary conservative talking point against almost all aid packages, which is deficit spending. By presenting this as a closed-loop system tariff revenue in, $2,000 dividends out, they are attempting to present a solution that is palatable across the aisle. This intent is crucial They are trying to position this as relief that does not draw upon existing deficit spending.
And critically, that it doesn't pull funds from politically sensitive areas like Social Security or Medicare.
Oh, absolutely. That would trigger massive, immediate opposition and kill the bill on arrival.
Hassett's explicit confirmation that there would be enough room to cover those checks and not go into the rest of the budget. That means that when this bill reaches Congress, the administration is going to promote it as having a $0 impact on the general fund.
It leverages the fact that this tariff revenue is already being collected. It's not new money, it's just reallocated money.
And that right there is the key takeaway for you regarding the financial plan. If this passes, it will establish a precedent for non-deficit funded emergency relief.
It's a powerful new tool in the policy toolbox provided. And this is the big if, provided the math holds up to intense scrutiny from Congress.
Always comes back to the math. So given the current status, we have high commitment, a firm dollar amount, a unique funding strategy, but it's stalled at the legislative level. What should you, the listener, be actively watching for?
There are two immediate concrete signals that will indicate movement from discussion to imminent reality.
Okay.
First, legislative action. You need to watch for a specific bill number, something introduced in either the House or the Senate that explicitly mandates the $2,000 dividend and specifically names the tariff revenue as the required funding mechanism.
That legislative language will be so critical. It's going to contain the final codified eligibility requirements, the official income number, not the, say, 100,000 estimate. That is the necessary hurdle that has to be cleared.
And second, you need to look for a specific timeline or concrete disbursement details from the administration.
Right. Besson and Leavitt confirmed they're exploring legal options, but neither of them gave a payment date.
Exactly. So a major public announcement that specifies when the first payments will go out, or if it's going to be direct deposit, which is most likely, that will be the final sign of progress, the finish line.
And until those two things happen, a specific bill number and a firm date, we really just remain in the monitoring phase. Continued vigilance over official administration updates and, of course, congressional schedules is essential.
It is.
This has been a really intense analysis, and it's focused on this unprecedented level of commitment and the unique financial architecture behind this potential $2,000 payment. So let's quickly reinforce the absolute key takeaways for you.
I think the biggest takeaway is just the depth of the executive resolve. The White House has repeatedly confirmed its dedication to making this $2,000 payment happen. We've seen 5 distinct pieces of public evidence from 3 top officials and the president himself. This isn't a trial balloon anymore, it's a stated policy intent. Second, eligibility. While it's still being negotiated, it's focusing on a specific economic range. The working figure for who's included is focused on families making less than, say, $100,000. Which is far more targeted than that initial universal promise.
Third, and this is the fundamentally unique part, the payment is proposed to be funded entirely by tariff revenue. This mechanism is the administration's core political argument. They're positioning the payment as budget-neutral release based on the calculations from their economic advisor, Kevin Hassett.
Even though that external skepticism about the precise numbers still remains.
Right. That's a key caveat.
And finally, the next critical steps are all legislative. It's about congressional action and the subsequent development of a firm public timeline. Without a passed bill, the payment is delayed indefinitely.
And understanding these 4 points allows you to accurately track the proposal's progress and, identify when the political maneuvering is serious versus when it is merely talk. And on that note, we'd encourage you to use this information. As the source material suggests, sharing this information and building momentum and support behind this can actually put necessary pressure on Congress. The higher the public attention and support this specific tariff-funded proposal receives, the greater the likelihood that lawmakers will feel compelled to act, and act quickly.
Let's close with a thought that looks a little bit past the immediate payment itself. If the administration successfully navigates the legislative process, if they secure bipartisan support, and they actually manage to fund these large, broad payments using only tariff revenue, what does that precedent mean for the future?
That's interesting. They are effectively creating a blueprint for major non-deficit financial relief, a dedicated walled-off revenue stream specifically for redistribution.
Exactly. This new funding mechanism using specific incoming revenue streams rather than new debt or budget cuts could fundamentally change the political and economic blueprint for how future emergency or targeted financial support is conceived, debated, and ultimately financed in the United States.
So this structural approach to funding, It's arguably more important than the $2,000 amount itself.
I think it is, and it is a mechanism that is worth watching. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take that huge, complex pile of financial and political source material and really just pull out the facts that matter to you.
And today, we are diving into one of the biggest, most impactful financial proposals we've seen in a while.
I mean, it's dominating the headlines. It's the promise of a pretty substantial and, for many people, a really life-changing cash distribution. We're talking about at least $2,000 per person.
Right, and this isn't just background noise. This is a conversation that directly affects millions of Americans, especially, and this is so important, especially for those of you relying on fixed benefits.
Absolutely. Social Security retirees, people on SSDI, SSI, veterans.
We've just seen a massive number of questions flood in about, eligibility, and maybe even more importantly, trust. Can we actually believe this is going to happen?
Yes, that's the core question. The chatter has gone from, like, a whisper to a roar. So our mission today is laser focused. We're taking all the sources we have, the official statements from the White House, confirmations from the Treasury, all the research reports, and we're going to cut right through the speculation. We need to clarify exactly what is being offered, what the administration is, putting on the line here, and most importantly, what this really means for your bank account, especially if you are in that low or middle income bracket.
And let's just anchor this right at the start. The key fact, and it's been confirmed repeatedly across all our sources, is the administration's solid commitment to a financial distribution of at least $2,000 per person.
At least. That's key.
It is, and they've been very, very precise about the target audience. They're stating this is explicitly for everyone, not including high-income people. So the whole design is to make sure those benefits flow directly to low- and middle-income citizens.
Now, we have to set the context here, which is just crucial for a deep dive like this. These announcements are, they're coming directly from the president and his top team.
Which, by definition, makes them politically charged.
Exactly. So our role here is not to advocate for or against this. We are strictly, data analysts. We are the impartial guides. Our only job is to unpack the factual details, to analyze the feasibility based on the numbers they've provided, and just explain what all these public statements mean for your financial reality and your stability.
So, okay, let's start with the basics, the terminology, because the sources have shown that the administration is kind of struggling to land on one single name for this payment.
It's true.
You'll hear it called a $2,000 stimulus check. Sometimes it's a $2,000 dividend, other times just a distribution or a rebate.
It's a real payment name game, and if you look closely at the analysts' notes in our sources, you can kind of see the strategy behind it. The name itself, functionally, it's irrelevant. It's just the movement of money from the government to you. But one source suggests the president has deliberately chosen the term dividend.
Right, because it, quote, sounds better.
It sounds better. It sounds like you're getting a return on an investment, rather than just a handout. And that little rhetorical shift is really meant to make the payment more palatable to broader political groups.
But regardless of what you call it, a check, a dividend, whatever, the core promise, which is what matters to every single person on a fixed income, it remains the same.
And that promise is?
A dividend of at least $2,000 a person. And I'm going to keep stressing that at least part. It's a really critical linguistic marker. It signals an intention not to disappoint, or maybe, just maybe, to even increase the amount later on, depending on political pressures.
And what's genuinely startling here, what really gives this proposal real weight, is the frequency, how often they've made this commitment.
Yeah, this isn't a one-off comment.
Not at all. The sources highlight that this is the fourth time the president has officially endorsed some kind of mass money distribution plan. Just since taking office back in January of this year, we're seeing a pattern solidify.
And we really have to trace that progression because it tells a story. It's a story of, frankly, escalating political necessity.
Yeah.
You mentioned the first attempt way back in February.
Yeah.
That was the quickly dismissed $5,000 Doge dividend proposal.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone who missed that, it was a highly unusual suggestion.
Unusual is one word for it. For a deep dive, we really have to pause and look at that. The sources described it as like bordering on performance art.
Right.
But it was a serious proposal to use cryptocurrency, specifically Dogecoin, as the way to get money to people. The analysts they dismissed it almost instantly.
Well, of course. The logistical and legal barriers to sending $5,000 through a volatile, non-federally managed asset like Dogecoin to millions of retirees and low-income citizens were just, they were astronomical.
It died very quickly. But it did signal an intention. It showed they wanted to distribute money, even if the method was out there.
So then you fast forward to August,
Hmm.
and the commitment becomes a lot more conventional. We see the introduction of the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025. That proposed a $600 rebate check.
Okay, so a concrete legislative attempt.
Exactly. Then, in early October, the president started talking about a distribution range, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000.
And now, just a few weeks later, here we are. We're firmly anchored at least 2,000. The pattern is crystal clear and, honestly, fiscally startling, as one source put it so well.
Every time he opens his mouth, the dollar amount gets bigger.
It just keeps going up. And this escalating promise, it significantly ratchets up the political stakes for them.
It does. And what increases the seriousness even further is that this isn't just, rhetoric from the top.
Right.
We now have formal, high-level cabinet endorsements.
That's a huge point. We saw the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. He came out and confirmed that the $2,000 rebate is, quote, in discussion.
He didn't wave it off as some hypothetical idea.
No, not at all. He framed it as an active policy consideration.
But the most definitive statement, the one that really locks them in, came from the White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt. She stated, and this is a direct quote from the official transcript.
What did she say?
She said, "The White House is committed to making that happen. Yes." And then she went on to elaborate, saying they are currently exploring all legal options to get that done.
Okay, hold on a moment. That is a very, very strong commitment. But let's pause and apply a critical lens, which is what we do here. When a top official says they're exploring all legal options, how much weight should our listeners, especially those of you on a tight budget, really put on that kind of political optimism? Is that a commitment or is that a goal?
That is a crucial distinction. In the political world, committed means they're intellectually and, publicly dedicated to the outcome. But in the practical legislative world, exploring all legal options means they haven't figured out the logistics yet.
Or secured the votes in Congress.
Or secured the votes. The sources all confirm that this statement really puts the White House out on a limb.
Right.
They have now committed to the outcome, that $2,000, which forces them to now figure out the nearly impossible mechanism, how to fund it and how to pass it.
Right. So it signals that for the administration, their policy position is fixed. It's non-negotiable, even if the pathway through Congress is going to be turbulent, to say the least.
Exactly. And that strong multi-level confirmation from the president, from the Treasury, from the press secretary, that's what makes this a real proposal and not just a rumor.
Okay, so let's move directly to the section that I think matters most to the vast majority of our audience. Eligibility. Who actually qualifies for this proposed $2,000 dividend? And what is the guarantee for those of you relying on Social Security, SSDI, SSI, or VA benefits?
Well, the excellent news here, really, is that the core principle has remained consistent through all of this. Income. Income is the only metric that matters.
That's the key takeaway. It's so important for everyone listening to hear that. Eligibility is always income-based. It doesn't matter what specific benefit you receive, whether it's Social Security retirement, SSDI, SSI, VA benefits, railroad retirement, it doesn't matter.
Your employment status, too. Whether you're currently working or not, that's secondary to your adjusted gross income.
So let's detail this evolving income threshold debate. In past stimulus rounds, they typically used, what was it, $75,000 for an individual?
Yeah. $75,000 for an individual, $150,000 for a married couple. And that captured around 85% of the American population. That was kind of the benchmark analysts were using.
But the administration seems to be aiming higher this time. Maybe they're seeking broader middle-class support. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he specified that the threshold they're talking about is for individuals earning less than $100,000.
Right. And if we just extrapolate from that, based on what they've done in the past, doubling that for married couples would put the upper limit at $200,000 for full eligibility.
Wow.
Which immediately brings more, high-earning middle-class Americans into the fold than previous distributions did.
Let's reflect on that for a second. The political calculus behind raising that cap from $75,000 to $100,000, that's a massive, 33% increase in the income ceiling?
It is.
Why would they float a number that's just going to make the total cost even higher than it already is?
The sources suggest two main reasons. First, it's about political appeal. $100,000 threshold, it broadens the base of support for the policy. It makes it feel less like a low-income welfare distribution and more like general middle-class relief.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second reason?
It's a negotiating tactic. If you start the bidding at 100,000, Congress can then negotiate it down to, say, 85 or 80,000.
Right.
And the administration can claim a legislative win by meeting them in the middle.
While still making sure that the core fixed income population is absolutely covered.
Precisely. Which brings us to the absolutely crucial point for our listeners, the inclusion of fixed income recipients. This directly addresses that constant anxiety, that fear that every time a payment is announced, those on federal benefits will somehow be excluded because of some technicality.
We get so many questions about this.
And the sources are unequivocal on this point. Fixed income beneficiaries are broadly and explicitly included. This covers Social Security, that's Title II, so retirement, SSDI, spousal survivor benefits. It covers SSI, which is Title X6, and it covers VA beneficiaries.
And why? What's the simple reason?
The simple reason is the very nature of these benefits means their income is inherently well below that $100,000 ceiling. For the vast majority, it's far below even the historical $75,000 mark.
So the payment is targeted at low and middle income people.
And that is exactly where these beneficiaries sit.
So the simple sanity check for you listening is this. Is your annual income below $75,000? If the answer is yes, you meet the primary requirement. This is about your income level, not your benefit type.
Now, can we tackle the single biggest source of confusion and fear?
The tax return myth.
The tax return myth. The narrative that goes, I don't file a tax return so the IRS won't know I exist and I won't get the money.
We need to spend some real time dispelling this because for so many SSI recipients and low-income retirees, they just don't have enough taxable income to justify filing a return.
And this is a critical misconception. It's rooted in how the system might have worked decades ago, but it's not how it works now. Filing a tax return has nothing to do with your eligibility when you receive benefits through the SSA or the VA.
The government does not need the IRS to be the middleman for data collection.
Let's just break down the technical process. Sometimes it's called the non-filer method. When you are a recipient of Social Security or SSDI or SSI, the Social Security Administration or the Department of Veterans Affairs already has a complete profile on you.
A comprehensive profile.
Exactly. They have your name, your current mailing address, they have your direct deposit information if you get your benefits that way, and crucially, they know your exact income level because they're the ones paying you that income. They have a fully functioning payment system that is completely separate from the IRS's tax filing system.
And here's where we can clarify the legal mechanism behind this. The payment is structured as an advance of a refundable tax credit. And that specific phrasing is really important.
The word refundable is key. A traditional tax credit might only reduce the amount of tax you owe. So if you don't owe any tax, that credit is useless to you. A refundable credit means that even if you have zero tax liability, even if you haven't filed a tax return in 20 years, you still get the full amount of the credit back as cash. It is designed precisely to make sure non-filers and low-income individuals benefit.
And that's why Treasury Secretary Besson referred to citizens seeing substantial tax refunds. He's using the technical term for the mechanism, even though for most of you on a fixed income, it won't feel like a refund at all. It's just a direct payment.
For the vast majority on Social Security Retirement or SSDI, that payment will come automatically through the SSA's existing payment rails. No action needed.
We should also briefly touch on the difference between, say, Title II and Title X6 recipients.
Good point. For SSI recipients, that's Title X6, the process is slightly different because SSI is a needs-based program. Now, the SSA still handles their payments, but historically in past rounds, those payments were often sent out a little later than the general Social Security population.
Why is that?
It's usually just due to internal processing delays between the SSA and the Treasury.
Yeah.
But the fundamental requirement is exactly the same. No separate application, no tax filing is necessary. If you are in the SSA system, they will find you.
Okay, so we've established the commitment and we've established who qualifies. Now, let's pivot to the really crucial question that exposes the core political contradiction in this whole proposal.
The funding.
The funding. Where is this $2,000 per person going to come from? And is the math even remotely feasible? The administration has repeatedly claimed the money is intended to be a distribution of revenues generated by the massive new tariffs. It's being pitched as giving tariff revenue back to the people.
And this is where we have to shift from, the optimism of the proposal to the hard reality of the numbers provided in the sources. We have to analyze the gap between what's coming in and what they want to send out.
So let's start with the revenue stream. The sources are reporting that these tariffs are currently generating about $1 billion a day.
$1 billion a day. which is a massive influx of cash. It totals out to approximately $350 billion per year.
Okay, $350 billion a year. That sounds like a gargantuan sum.
It is a gargantuan sum, but now let's compare that to the expense. We established that the estimated cost of this proposed $2,000 payment, if it's sent to 85% of the population, that's roughly 284 million qualifying Americans. The cost is a staggering $568 billion, more than half a trillion dollars.
So wait, let me get this straight. We need $568 billion for this one-time payment.
Right,
But the annual tariff income is only $350 billion.
which leaves a gap of $218 billion.
So the math instantly confirms that the administration's current story, it's incomplete.
It is. Funding one single $2,000 payment for most eligible Americans would eat up nearly a year and a half of all current tariff revenue. And that's assuming they halt every other government spending project that uses that revenue.
And waiting that long, 18 months or more, is just politically and practically impossible for a distribution they've promised for early next year.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Which leads us directly to the technical reality that the sources all point to. The government cannot fund this payment based on current annual revenue alone. The only way to do it is by leveraging future income. And that means borrowing.
Borrow.
The sources confirm the tariffs are projected to bring in over $3 trillion over the next 10 years. So the revenue is guaranteed to be collected over time, but the money hasn't been collected today.
Right.
Therefore, to deliver the payment quickly, the government would have to borrow the required $568 billion today, send it out to all of you, and then pay that debt back over the coming decade using those future tariff revenues as collateral.
Okay, let's use an analogy here because these numbers are just huge. Think of the government like a big company that just signed a massive guaranteed 10-year contract worth $3 trillion.
Okay, they know the money's coming.
They know the revenue is coming. But they decide they need to give a $568 billion bonus to their employees today. They don't have the cash on hand.
So what do?
They go to the bank. They take out a massive short-term business loan based on that guaranteed 10-year contract. They send the bonus out immediately.
But they've just attached the cost of that immediate payout to their national credit card. They're adding $568 billion to the national debt right now.
And this borrowing mechanism is the only way for them to easily swing a large distribution quickly, rather than waiting a year and a half to collect the full amount.
And it exposes the political contradiction. Publicly, they're saying the money is from tariffs. Technically, they have to use debt to front the cost.
And that reliance on borrowing, that underscores the whole policy risk here. The administration is asking Congress to knowingly increase the national debt by over $500 billion today to fund a dividend that's being marketed as being paid for.
This will be the central point of contention. When this bill inevitably reaches the highly partisan chambers of Congress, this is what they will fight about.
So let's look at the alternatives discussed in the sources. The two levers Congress could pull to reduce the cost if they just absolutely refuse to increase the national debt by that much.
The first lever is simple. You reduce the dollar amount. If they were forced by fiscal conservatives to cut the payment from $2,000 down to $1,000,
that cuts the cost in half.
it immediately cuts the total cost to $284 billion.
Yeah.
That amount is easily feasible within 1 year of current tariff revenue, which eliminates the immediate need for major borrowing.
Okay, so that's option one. What's the second lever?
The second lever is to tighten eligibility.
Yeah.
You could keep the full promised $2,000 amount, but drastically reduce the number of people who get it if you only sent it to, say, the lowest 50% of the population who are struggling the most, instead of 85%.
That cost also lands near that $284 billion mark.
Right. And this creates a really critical policy choice that we need to spend a moment on.
Yeah, let's unpack that. Do lawmakers prioritize sending a smaller amount, say $1,000, to a much broader group of people, 85%, which includes the fixed income core, but also a lot of middle income families who are, doing okay?
Or do they honor the full $2,000 commitment, but limit it only to the subset of the population, maybe the lowest 50%, who demonstrably need that full amount the most?
That decision will be the true test of their priorities, because for our listeners who are on SSI or only Social Security, that $2,000 can be the difference between just struggling and actually having some dignity.
Absolutely. Cutting that to $1,000, even if it goes to more people, is a huge reduction in the actual impact for those with the deepest need.
Okay, so let's transition now to the practical details, the timeline and logistics. When is this money actually expected to arrive?
Well, the simple truth is that no exact calendar date or month is known, but we can frame the timing within the political and legislative process to give you a realistic window.
And the key anchor point, as we mentioned earlier, came from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Besson. He indicated that citizens will see substantial tax refunds early next year.
Right. And given that this announcement is happening in late 2025, early next year, means the first few months of 2026.
And this whole timeline is dictated by the legislative pace.
Completely. Even if a bill were introduced tomorrow, getting it passed through the House, then reconciled with the Senate version, and finally signed by the president.
Yeah.
That takes, at a minimum, a month to a month and a half.
And that's if everything goes smoothly.
That's if everything goes smoothly. Then the Treasury Department needs another 4 to 6 weeks to reprogram their payment systems and actually start the distribution. So that whole process just inherently pushes the earliest possible delivery into late Q1 of 2026.
So we're talking March, maybe April in a best-case scenario.
That's the best-case scenario. Now, if we look at the broader political drivers, the sources suggest the most likely window for distribution actually stretches all the way until the midterm elections in November of 2026.
Why so late?
Because historically, politicians on both sides of the aisle tend to use these kinds of distributions or rebates, what some of the sources bluntly call a bribe, to boost voter sentiment right before a major election.
So that provides a solid maximum deadline for them to act.
Exactly. So for you listening, you should view early 2026 as the optimistic target, with the period leading up to the November 2026 midterms being the high probability window for the money to actually hit your account.
Okay, let's talk about a crucial protection: financial offsets and garnishment. So many people on fixed incomes worry that this money will be announced and then immediately seized by creditors or deducted because of old debts. We need to detail the very rare conditions where a payment might be reduced or withheld.
The primary condition for an offset is if you owe a liability directly to the federal government. We have to be really clear about that. This specifically includes things like past due federal income taxes, or in some past distributions, delinquent student loan payments that are owed to the federal government.
And let's be blunt about how that works. If you owe the federal government $10,000 in back taxes, they are not going to cut you a full $2,000 check.
No. They will keep the $2,000 payment, and that will reduce your liability down to $8,000. It's an offset. It's not a seizure for general debt.
We should also remember the specific criteria from past stimulus rounds. Past due child support was also a reason for offset.
Yes, and that is a major liability that could definitely apply again, but it all depends on the final legislative text.
But here is the critical reassurance for the vast majority of our listeners on a fixed income. If you are on Social Security, SSDI, or VA benefits, and you do not have significant outstanding federal liabilities, which is the case for most of you, the payment should be received without any offset.
And critically, these payments are typically protected from general debt collectors, unlike your regular income.
So a credit card company can't touch it.
A credit card company or a hospital debt collector, they cannot garnish these funds once they hit your bank account. And that protection offers immense relief. It provides that much-needed breathing room and, frankly, the dignity to pay your essential bills without the fear of immediate seizure.
Finally, in this section, we have to address financial security and scams. The sources are very clear about how these payments would arrive through existing SSA, VA, and Treasury records.
And that confirmation is the perfect foundation for a very strong warning. Scammers will inevitably try to exploit the confusion around this proposal.
So let's be absolutely 100% clear.
This is non-negotiable advice. The SSA, the VA, and the Treasury Department already have your information. They have your direct deposit details. They have your address.
Yeah.
You do not need to do anything to receive this money if you are already a federal beneficiary.
Therefore, if anyone calls you or texts you or emails you or sends you a direct message asking for money or for your bank account verification or personal information like your Social Security number to process your $2,000 dividend,
That is a scam. It is 100% fraud.
the government does not initiate contact this way for unsolicited payments. Ever.
Trust only official letters sent through the mail or verified government websites. If a payment is coming, you will see it show up in your existing Direct Express account or your bank account. Do not engage with anyone claiming to be from the IRS or the SSA asking for a processing fee for this dividend.
And you should report any suspicious contact immediately to the Inspector General's office.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to the underlying political and economic forces at play here. This is where the deep dive really earns its name.
Yeah, why is the administration pushing this so aggressively? They've made 4 separate commitments when the funding math is so obviously difficult. The sources suggest they've really boxed themselves into a corner.
They have. The commitment is now so deep that the potential damage from failing to deliver is immense. One source explicitly noted the intense political danger here.
What did it say?
It said that if they do not follow through with this payment, and specifically with the promised $2,000 amount, their credibility, particularly with that crucial low and middle-income electorate, is, quote, going to go down the toilet.
Wow.
They called the failure to deliver a really, really, really bad messaging campaign.
And the analogy used in the source material is potent. It says the administration is dangerously close to becoming the kid who cried wolf way too many times.
They've set the expectation now. If the delivery is delayed indefinitely, or if the amount is cut dramatically to, say, $500, the resulting collapse of trust would be devastating, especially among the fixed-income population who rely on these funds the most.
So this high political risk tells us they view this payment as essential. But beyond the politics, we have to analyze the economic catalysts. Stimulus is rarely just political.
It's almost always pegged to underlying economic anxieties.
And the sources reveal a really stark contrast. You have the official government reports claiming the economy is booming.
And then you have the underlying data, which is described